Welcome back, brothers, to Ammo Lore. Tonight we're diving into lore like Heralds of Despair. As always, be sure to like and comment on videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from up here. And I thank you guys for your support. You've been killing it. Now, let's get into the video.
Edrin Pell had learned that silence was not the absence of sound. Silence aboard the sepulchre of patience possessed weight. It pressed against his eardrums with the slow insistence of deep water. It lived beneath the groan of ancient bulkheads, beneath the wet cycling of ventilation ducts, and the ceaseless scrape of things moving behind walls where no maintenance passage appeared on any surviving schematic. It waited beneath every toll of the plague bells suspended along the cruiser's central spine. The bells rang without hands to move them. Sometimes they tolled once, sometimes 7 times. Whenever they rang, men vanished from the slave decks. Pell sat at a lectern fashioned from black iron and fused vertebrae, his wrists locked inside brass restraint cuffs. A figure stood behind him. Pell could hear the warrior breathing. Each inhalation rasped through armor filters, clogged with phlegm and spores. Each exhalation emerged as a moist mechanical growl. The sound came slowly, with such long pauses, that Pell repeatedly believed the warrior had stopped breathing altogether. "Continue," the plague marine said. Pell swallowed. His throat tasted of old copper. "Designation," he dictated. "Heralds of Despair. Classification uncertain. Probable Vectorium strength formation of the Traitor Legion, historically identified as the Death Guard." The figure behind him shifted. Ceramite scraped against the deck. Pell stared down at the slate. Known heraldry consists of bright green plate with pale copper trim. Legion iconography varies. Modified sigils resembling the tripartite mark of the plague god are common. "Name him." Pell's fingers tightened inside the cuffs. "Nurgle." The plague marine's breathing deepened, almost in approval. Pell continued. "The formation displays extensive use of Mark III power armor components. Many suits possess plates consistent with Great Crusade-era manufacture. Provenance cannot be verified." He risked looking over his shoulder. The warrior filled the archive chamber like a diseased idol. His armor had perhaps once been Mark III plate. The broad breastplate and heavy frontal reinforcement remained recognizable beneath layers of corrosion, scarring, and organic distortion. Bright green ceramite showed through where filth had not covered it. Pale copper edging framed the plates, darkened almost black around rivets that had swollen into yellowed nodules. The armor was no longer merely worn. It had grown. Ribs of metal and bone curved across the warrior's abdomen. Cables sank into folds of mottled flesh before emerging elsewhere in wet loops. One pauldron bore a skull, whose lower jaw moved soundlessly whenever the warrior breathed. The helmet's visor was a single horizontal slit, glowing a feverish amber behind a crust of mineral deposits. Pell had catalogued armor for 17 years on Griffin's Reach. He had inspected relic suits preserved by chapters whose names could make governors kneel. He knew the devotional marks of artificers, the classification stamps of forgotten forge worlds, and the subtle differences between true Legion plate and later imitations. The warrior behind him wore both. His left vambrace had been forged before the Horus heresy. His right greave bore the half-erased serial mark of a loyalist armory destroyed less than 80 years ago. His backpack contained reactor housings from 3 distinct patterns, fused together by corroded metal that pulsed like scar tissue. Pell turned back to the slate. Other components appear to have been recovered from more recent battlefields. Some show evidence of forced integration from captured suits. The warband's age cannot be conclusively established. Surviving records provide no reliable date for the adoption of the title Heralds of Despair. "Good," said the plague marine. Pell glanced back again. "Good, Lord? Uncertainty survives longer than truth." The warrior leaned closer. A bead of dark fluid gathered beneath his gorget and struck the deck beside Pell's boot. The metal hissed. "Write that their history begins wherever men first sealed a gate against death." "That is not verifiable." The warrior's helmet tilted. Pell felt the pressure of its regard. "No," the Plague Marine agreed. "It is inevitable." The archive door opened with the dragging shriek of metal tearing across bone. 2 human thralls entered, both male, both blindfolded with strips of parchment stitched into the flesh around their eyes. They unlocked Pell's restraints, but left the cuffs around his wrists. "Rise," said the Plague Marine. Pell stood on unsteady legs. "Where are you taking me?" "To witness the beginning." The corridors beyond the archive were broad enough for armored columns, yet the plague cruiser seemed to constrict around him. The deck plates bowed beneath malignant growth. Veins pulsed through the walls. Rusted devotional tablets hung from chains, their inscriptions obscured beneath mold, and handprints left in ancient blood. The Heralds of Despair moved through the vessel without haste. Some carried bolters, whose casings had fused to gauntlets. Others bore plague knives, cleavers, or long-barreled launchers crusted with dried secretion. They did not exchange boasts. They did not chant. Their silence was not restraint, but certainty. They walked like men who had already attended the funerals of every living thing. The Strategium occupied what had once been the cruiser's principal chapel. Statues of forgotten imperial saints had been decapitated and turned to face the walls. Their stone heads lay arranged in circles around the central hololithic projector, mouths filled with black soil. Incense burners swung from the vaulted ceiling, spilling clouds that smelled of damp graves and opened bowels. Siege Lord Malachor Fell waited beside the Strategium table. Pell recognized command not from insignia, but from the stillness surrounding him. The other warriors stood at measured distances, as though even corruption obeyed his gravity. Fell's armor was less bloated than that of his brothers, but older. Layered plates rose over one another like the shell of some abyssal predator. Verdigrised copper trim enclosed sheets of scarred green ceramite. A long power scythe rested in one hand. Its blade was dark, pitted, and filmed with moisture. Beside him stood Othrix Sevenfold, the warband's tallyman. Scrolls hung from his armor in mouldering curtains. Brass counters clicked across an abacus fixed to his breastplate. A servo skull hovered near his shoulder, whispering numbers through teeth wired shut. On Fell's other side waited Hethron Morn, a malignant plague caster whose hooded head was surrounded by flies. His staff had been formed from several human femurs bound around a corroded shaft. The flies entered his mouth when he breathed and crawled from his nostrils when he spoke. The hololith awakened. A world appeared above the table. Grey continents turned beneath bands of industrial cloud. Fortress complexes glowed along mountain chains and poisoned seas. Orbital stations circled the planet like barbed wire. Fell placed 3 objects on the Strategium table. The first was a rusted ration chit. The second was a vial of clear water. The third was a human jawbone, stripped clean except for a few strands of tendon darkened to leather. Pell watched the Siege Lord arrange them in a line. "No invasion begins with a gun," Fell said. His voice emerged through his helm as a low, grinding resonance. It was not loud. Every warrior heard him. A fortress is conquered by 3 weapons. Scarcity. He touched the ration chit. Contamination. 1 talon rested against the vial. And proof. He lifted the jawbone. Proof that death is not approaching. Proof that death is already inside. Othrix Sevenfold's counters began to click. "How many?" asked Fell. 19,311,208,000 registered souls, Othrix replied. The unregistered lower hive population is estimated at a further 1 billion. And defenders? 214 million Astra Militarum and planetary defense personnel of recognized combat grade. 1,600,000,000 labor levies, militia, reserve formations, Skitari cohorts and combat servitors capable of bearing arms. Pell stared at the world turning above them. "Morvain," he whispered. Fell looked toward him. Pell felt his stomach harden. He knew the name. Every Munitorum adept did. Bastion World Morvain guarded the Calistin Gate, a comparatively stable warp route connecting 47 isolated Imperial systems to the greater supply arteries of the Segmentum. Ammunition cities covered its northern landmass. Subterranean barracks descended for kilometers beneath its fortress hives. Granaries the size of provinces fed crusades that most citizens would never know existed. 9 concentric defense belts surrounded Calistin, the principal fortress hive. Wall 9 formed the outermost ring, a continental scar of ferrocrete, armor glass, and adamantine. Beyond it lay minefields dense enough to dismember an army before its first shot. Orbital gun platforms guarded the upper atmosphere. Defense lasers could burn through capital ships. Macro cannon emplacements hid beneath mountains. Void shields overlapped above the hive in layered domes. A frontal assault would slaughter millions before the first warrior reached the walls. Even the Death Guard could be destroyed by sufficient fire. Pell looked at the 3 objects. "You mean to besiege it?" "No," Fell said. "They will besiege themselves." On Morvain, Colonel Hadron Malk walked beneath a sky he could not see. Wall 9 rose around him in tiers of black ferrocrete, its upper battlements lost behind smoke, gun decks, and the ceaseless glare of lumen arrays. The trench network before the wall descended through multiple levels, some broad enough for armored formations, others so narrow that soldiers had to turn sideways to pass. Ammunition lifts rumbled through reinforced shafts. One platform ascended beside him, carrying a Baneblade super-heavy tank, its hull black with devotional oils. The vehicle's tracks were wider than a habroom. Servitors crawled across its armor, welding fresh purity plates over scars earned in wars older than most of the conscripts watching it. Those conscripts stood in ranks along the firing steps. Many had been born beneath Calistin. Some had never seen natural daylight. They stared at the painted sky panels installed above the muster corridors, as though the crude blue pigment were a holy relic. Malk stopped beside a water conduit. 3 rats lay dead beneath it. Their bodies were swollen, legs stretched stiffly from distended torsos. Black fluid had leaked from their mouths and dried in branching patterns across the deck. A maintenance sergeant noticed Malk's gaze. "Vermin poison, Colonel." "Which compound?" The sergeant hesitated. "I would need to consult the quartermaster." "Do so." "Yes, Colonel." Malk moved on. At the next junction, a loading servitor stood facing the wall. Its cargo claws opened and closed around nothing. "Blessed is the wound," it repeated. "Blessed is the opening. Blessed is the mouth beneath the stone." A tech adept struck it with an electroprod. The servitor convulsed. "Routine catechism corruption," the adept said. "Its memory stack is degraded." "That is not a recognized catechism." "No, Colonel." "Destroy it." The tech adept bowed. "By your order." Malk continued toward the Vox bunker. Inside, operators sat beneath hanging cables and banks of green-lit instruments. Static whispered through the chamber. One operator had removed his headset and was staring at it. "Problem?" The man rose too quickly. "No, Colonel." Malk held out his hand. The operator surrendered the headset. At first, Malk heard only encrypted traffic, range reports, ammunition counts, identification challenges from orbital patrols. Then, beneath it all, came breathing. Slow, wet, patient. Source? Unknown, Colonel. It is beneath every secured channel. Signal intrusion? The cryptographic engines report no breach. Malk listened until the breathing stopped. A voice whispered a single word. Soon. Lord General Castor Wren received Malk's report in Calistin's central command vault. The chamber was carved into bedrock beneath the fortress hive, protected by meters of armor, void shielding and blast doors, engraved with the names of dead commanders. Hololithic displays projected regimental positions across the world. Red icons marked orbital assets. Gold represented the 9 defense belts. Captain Balian Rourke of the Imperial Fists stood beside the central display. He wore yellow battle plates scarred by old campaigns. His helmet was locked at his belt. His face was broad, pale and expressionless, the skin crossed by surgical lines and one ancient burn. Wren read Malk's report and set the slate aside. Dead rats, a defective servitor and Vox interference. Symptoms, Rourke said. Of what? Preparation. Wren looked around the assembled commanders. Morvain holds nearly 2 billion armed defenders. Our orbital batteries can cripple a battle fleet. The walls have survived 3 major wars. Rourke's gaze remained on the hololith. Walls do not consume food. Wren frowned. Men do, the Space Marine continued. So do civilians. So do furnace crews, medici staff, and the laborers who keep your atmosphere cycling. Once the gates close, your strength becomes arithmetic. We possess reserves. For 6 months under declared census. Wren's jaw tightened. You doubt our figures? I doubt all figures calculated by men who fear reporting insufficiency. Warning runes ignited across the orbital display. An astropath screamed somewhere beyond the command vault. The sound came through 3 sealed doors. The Heralds of Despair entered the Morvain system behind its outermost moon. The warp opened like infected flesh beneath a blade. Plague cruisers emerged through clouds of luminous corruption, their hulls trailing frozen debris, corpse fragments and swarms of insects that should not have survived in void. Escorts followed in scattered formations, engines burning a sickly green. Hethron Morn stood within the sepulchre of Patience's observation sanctum and lowered his staff. The warp disturbance he had cultivated folded around the fleet, blinding augurs beyond the moon. The first Imperial courier station transmitted one partial warning before lance fire cut it in half. The astropathic relay followed, then the patrol craft. Boarding torpedoes punched into the crippled ships. Heralds entered through ruptured hulls and advanced without urgency, bolters firing single rounds into officers, engine seers, and Vox personnel. They left selected ratings alive. Those survivors transmitted panic, contradictory headings, false fleet strengths, reports of demons inside sealed compartments. Commodore Akast Wren formed his ships into a defensive line before Morvain. Torpedo spreads crossed the darkness. Attack craft burned between capital ships. Lance beams carved white wounds through the void. The Heralds refused him. Whenever Wren concentrated his cruisers, their escorts withdrew beyond effective range. Whenever he dispersed to protect the system's installations, plague ships struck fuel tenders, repair docks, and ammunition carriers. One supply vessel burned for an hour before its magazine detonated. Another drifted toward Morvain, broadcasting hymns through a bridge full of dead men. Within hours, Wren retained most of his warships. He had lost the means to keep them fighting. Far below, beneath the lowest hive, Golvair's agents opened the reservoirs. Pilgrims unwrapped sores concealed beneath devotional bandages and washed them in intake channels. Corpse reclamation workers poured clear cultures into filtration cisterns. Infected servitors altered chemical ratios while their overseers slept. The water remained transparent. It tasted clean. It passed the ordinary rites of chemical blessing. The first symptoms would come later, only after the gates were closed. The orbital bombardment began at dusk. Space elevators died first, their cables severed by lance fire. They fell across continents in burning lines, crushing districts beneath descending mountains of metal. External granaries erupted one after another. Void docks broke apart under macro shell impacts, scattering ships and workers into the atmosphere. The walls remained untouched. Wren watched the destruction from the command vault. "They are conserving ammunition," he said. Rourke studied the targeting pattern. "No." "What then?" "They are not trying to enter." The last space elevator struck the northern plain. The impact threw dust high enough to stain the sky. Rourke turned toward the Lord General. "They are removing every means by which we might leave." The order went out across Morvain. "Seal the gates." Billions descended into shelters, barracks, manufactoria vaults, and subterranean transit arteries. Sirens wailed across fortress hives. Adamantine portals began to close, each one descending with the weight of a cathedral. On the bridge of the Sepulchre of Patience, Pell watched Morvain imprison itself. The guns fell silent. Every plague cruiser ceased firing. Pell looked toward Malachor Fell. Why has the battle stopped? The Siege Lord watched the final gate close. The impact rolled across the world like distant thunder. Because now the fortress is complete, Fell said. They have built their own coffin. Morvain awoke to isolation. The first astropath died before dawn in Calistin's choir vault, biting through his own tongue as the warp closed around his mind. The second tore out both eyes with his thumbs. The third managed to project 3 words beyond the Bastion world's atmosphere before something answered from the darkness between stars. His skull split along the crown. Blood, brain matter, and grey smoke sprayed across the sanctified receiving circle. The remaining astropaths screamed with him, though none had opened their mouths. Their attendants fled the chamber until Commissariat guards sealed the doors and ordered the choir back into position at gunpoint. Every subsequent attempt ended the same way. Some died. Others survived without sanity. One continued whispering coordinates that led nowhere, repeating them until his throat collapsed and his lungs filled with blood. The Plague Fleet's interference did not resemble a conventional warp storm. It pulsed around Morvain in slow contractions, tightening whenever an astropath reached beyond the system. The currents of the Empyrean had become a diseased membrane drawn across the planet, yielding just enough to let hope press against it before crushing that hope beneath impossible pressure. Long-range augurs painted an equally grim picture. Enemy vessels had established anchorages across the system, rather than gathering into a battle line. Plague cruisers drifted behind moons, shattered stations, and the wreckage of merchant traffic. Escorts prowled the void between them in loose hunting patterns. Other contacts remained still for hours at a time, their drives cold, their hulls masked by debris and radiation. They were not preparing to strike Morvain. They were forming a ring. Lord General Castor Wren stood beneath the command vault's hololithic display as the system filled with red threat runes. Officers moved around him carrying slates, casualty reports, and petitions from districts already demanding exemption from rationing. "Seal all civilian granaries," Wren said. "Place them under military authority. Water distribution is to be reduced by 1/7. Oxygen allotments remain unchanged until we have confirmed the lower hive census." A Munitorum prefect bowed. "The ecclesiarchy is requesting additional grain for devotional observances." Denied. "They claim reduced offerings may cause disorder." "Then they may explain to the faithful why the Emperor requires bread more urgently than soldiers." The prefect hesitated. "What shall be announced regarding relief?" Wren looked toward the hololith. Beyond its shifting light, Captain Balian Rourke remained motionless in his yellow armor. "Relief is already inbound," Wren said. The prefect's expression tightened. "Do we possess confirmation?" "No." "Then, Lord General, we possess 19 billion citizens who will begin killing one another if they believe no one is coming. Announce that 3 battle groups have received our distress signal. State that Navy elements are translating toward the Calistin Gate." Rourke spoke after the prefect departed. "A lie cannot reinforce a wall. It can reinforce the men standing upon it. For a time, for today." The Imperial Fist's scarred face showed no anger. That absence made his disapproval heavier. Wren turned from him. "You would have me tell them that every astropath we send into the warp dies screaming? I would have you ration truth as carefully as water. Truth does not operate shell presses." "No," Rourke said, "but when your lie fails, neither will fear." Above Morvain, the Heralds of Despair began dismantling the orbital defenses. They did not charge the gun platforms. They did not mass before the defense lasers or contest the weapon stations in displays of defiance. The Plague Fleet moved with the slow precision of surgeons working upon a restrained patient. Corrupted wrecks were pushed ahead of the advancing vessels. Freighters, patrol craft, and shattered escort hulls drifted into the firing arcs of Morvaine's platforms. Some contained dead crews, wired upright at their stations. Others had been packed with scrap, munitions, and bloated human remains until their mass signatures resembled
Operational warships. Orbital guns opened fire. Macro shells tore the wrecks apart. Defense lasers burned through kilometers of dead metal. Torpedoes detonated among debris clouds that spread wider with every impact, obscuring targeting solutions and choking auger returns. Behind the wreckage, plague ships drifted into position. Their lances fired in measured intervals. One beam struck the heat exchangers beneath platform Kappa Tertius. The next burned through the exposed coolant manifolds. A third pierced the ammunition magazine after the station's void shields fluctuated under thermal overload. The platform did not explode immediately. It cooked. Bulkheads glowed red. Shell racks detonated one after another through its internal spine. Thousands of crewmen died behind sealed blast doors as the temperature climbed beyond survivable limits. Some clawed open their own respirators because the recycled air had become hotter than furnace breath. Others hammered upon maintenance hatches until the flesh stripped from their fingers. Boarding torpedoes arrived before the station completed its death. They struck maintenance shafts, waste ejectors, and repair docks rather than armored command sections. Plague Marines emerged into spaces never designed for defense. Their bolters fired through servitor pens, reactor galleries, and ammunition hoists. Explosive rounds entered naval armsmen and burst inside them, throwing meat and bone fragments across cogitator banks. The Heralds reached the platform's targeting core, while its command crew still believed the assault remained confined to the lower decks. They turned its weapons upon the neighboring station. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Edron Pell watched Imperial gunfire cross the void. The plague cruiser's bridge was a cathedral of corroded machinery. Columns shaped like fused skeletons rose toward a ceiling lost in darkness. Human thralls worked at consoles built into alcoves of diseased flesh. Their hands moved across brass keys, while feeder tubes disappeared into their necks and spines. There was no alarm. No officer shouted. No crewman called for the favor of the gods. Range calculations passed between the heralds in low, distorted voices. Platform rotation has slowed by 4 degrees. Void fluctuation confirmed. Amend lance impact 300 meters sunward. Contamination level upon the lower habitation decks, 32% and rising. Insufficient. Introduce the second culture. Pell stood beside Othric Sevenfold, watching brass counters move across the tallyman's breastplate. Each click represented altered trajectories, expected fatalities, or the expenditure of ammunition. The servo skull beside Othric whispered in a dead child's voice. 4,712. Othric adjusted one counter. A lance beam crossed the darkness. On the main display, an Imperial defense station vanished inside a sphere of white light. The servo skull spoke again. 9,183. Pell stared at the spreading wreckage. Those are men. Othric did not look at him. They were men before the correction. Does that distinction matter? To the tally. Another station began to rotate out of control. Its guns continued firing as it turned, sending shells into empty space and through the flank of an Imperial escort attempting to withdraw. The heralds reacted as laborers might react to the collapse of rotten masonry. No cheering passed across the bridge. No warrior lifted a weapon in triumph. The destruction was not victory to them. It was progress. Commodore Akast Wren refused to wait for the ring to close. His surviving capital ships assembled beyond Morvaine's orbital docks beneath the cover of the remaining gun platforms. Cruisers formed the center. Frigates and destroyers spread ahead in layered screens. Massed attack craft launched from carrier decks, their engines becoming a moving constellation against the night. Wren stood upon the bridge of the indomitable decree, his uniform coat scorched from an earlier hit. Blood had dried beneath one ear, where a console had shattered during the first exchange. "Primary objective remains the outer corridor," he said. "The courier squadron is not to engage. They break through and translate. Every other vessel shields their advance." His flag lieutenant glanced toward the tactical display. "Enemy formation remains dispersed. They want us divided. We will not oblige them." "What of Morvain?" "Morvain needs word carried beyond this system more than it needs our ships intact." The Imperial fleet advanced. Torpedo spreads crossed millions of kilometers. Frigates burned hard beneath the cover of electronic countermeasures. Bombers and assault craft struck through debris clouds, targeting plague escorts before their heavier vessels could converge. The Void battle killed hundreds of thousands before either fleet saw another ship with the naked eye. Torpedoes entered hulls at impossible speeds and transformed entire decks into expanding metal storms. Lance fire opened cruisers from prow to stern. Attack craft fought among wreckage and frozen corpses, their pilots dying in seconds-long engagements no distant commander could follow. Wren's fleet reached the center of the cordon. For several minutes, the corridor appeared open. Courier vessels accelerated toward the system edge. Then the Heralds moved. Escorts that had seemed to retreat returned from behind the outer moon. Plague cruisers emerged from radiation shadows, with their drives burning at full output. Wrecks previously dismissed as dead ships ignited corrupted engines and turned across the courier squadron's path. Wren watched the trap close. "All cruisers, concentrate fire on the vessel designated Carrion 6. Frigates maintain the corridor." The indomitable Decree fired a full broadside. Macro cannon rounds crossed the void in a storm of armor-piercing mass. Lance batteries struck a plague cruiser already wounded by bomber attacks. Its void shields collapsed. Shells opened the hull and tore through several decks. Venting gas, wreckage and bodies streamed from the wound. The plague cruiser did not withdraw. It turned its damaged flank toward Wren's formation and absorbed another salvo. Behind it, 3 Herald escorts targeted the indomitable Decree's engines. The first torpedo failed against the void shields. The second detonated near the stern. The third entered the primary drive section and burst inside the plasma containment chambers. The flagship shuddered. Deck plates folded, conduits ruptured. Men died before alarms could sound, reduced to black silhouettes against curtains of escaping fire. "Drive output lost," an officer shouted. "Secondary plasma feeds are collapsing. Bring us about on maneuvering thrusters. We cannot match fleet speed." Wren watched the Imperial formation continue without him. The corridor remained open for another 43 seconds. Then the plague fleet closed it. Boarding impacts struck the flagship. Naval armsmen formed shield walls in the smoke-filled passageways outside the command decks. Shot cannons and lascarbines aimed down corridors lit by emergency lumens. Officers shouted firing orders, while bulkheads groaned around them. The first Herald appeared through a ruptured maintenance hatch. He came through sideways, forcing swollen armor between torn metal. Bolter fire hammered his chest and shoulder. Ceramite broke. Black blood sprayed the wall behind him. He continued advancing. His bolter fired once. The explosive round entered an armsman's shield, passed through his forearm, and detonated inside his chest. His torso opened across the formation, ribs and lungs striking the men behind him. The shield wall fired again. More Heralds emerged. Bolter rounds burst men apart at the waist. A plague knife passed through a shield, and the hands holding it, the blade's corrosion spreading across metal and flesh before the severed pieces hit the deck. Wounded ratings crawled away from the fighting, leaving trails of blood that began to foam and sprout pale fungal growth. One dying armsman convulsed. His abdomen swelled until the uniform tore open. Intestines spilled across the deck, moving with blind, muscular contractions. Flies poured from his mouth. When a corpsman bent to help him, the dying man seized the corpsman's face and coughed black fluid between his lips. The infection traveled faster than panic.
Wren withdrew through the command deck's final blast door with 30 surviving officers and armsmen, the metal sealed behind them. Impacts sounded from the other side. Slow, measured. "Set demolition charges," Wren ordered. His flag lieutenant stared at him. "Commodore, they want the command codes. The bridge cogitators can be purged. They will recover them from us." Another impact struck the door. A deformation appeared in the metal. Wren looked around at the men who remained. Some were bleeding. One had already begun to shake with fever. "The Emperor requires duty," Wren said, "not survival." The demolition officer armed the charges. The blast destroyed the command deck, killed every man within it, and threw the forward section of the indomitable decree into darkness. The Heralds entered the ruins later. They recovered Wren's corpse from beneath a collapsed support beam. Half his skull was missing. One hand still gripped the hilt of his officer's saber. Golver preserved the body in a glass vessel filled with yellow fluid. Surgical tendrils entered the dead Commodore's spine and the exposed remnants of his brain. The codes came slowly, extracted from memory, implants, and command cipher organs. The corpse opened its eyes when the process began. On Morvain, the ecclesiarchy declared victory. Preachers filled the Vox networks with proclamations that Commodore Wren had shattered the plague fleet and forced its survivors into retreat. Bells rang through Calistin. Manufactorum overseers reported increased production. Desertion fell. Workers returned to ammunition lines with devotional strips tied around their arms. Wren permitted every word. Captain Rourke found him watching crowds gather beneath the command vault's external pict feeds. "They believe the fleet is broken," the Imperial Fist said. "They are working. They will learn the truth. Not today. When they do, the fall will be greater." Wren looked at the millions kneeling beneath shrine projectors. "Morvain requires obedience today. Spiritual purity can concern the dead." Beyond Wall 9, the Heralds began constructing their siege ring. Slave laborers and plague cultists raised rusted redoubts beyond effective small arms range. Demon engines dragged armor plates through irradiated mud. Plague-burst crawlers settled into overlapping batteries, their mortars elevated toward the fortress. Myphitic blight haulers hauled ammunition through ground churned into black slurry. Shells were sorted by payload: explosive, chemical, spore, corpse, psychic. Imperial artillery answered. Basilisks, manticores, medusas, and fixed fortress batteries fired continent-spanning barrages. The sky became a ceiling of smoke and descending fire. Shells pulverized cultist trenches, overturned demon engines, and buried herald emplacements beneath mountains of soil. When the barrage ended, plague marines emerged from the ruins. Some carried broken weapons. Some dragged organs behind them through rents in their armor. One walked with half his head removed, a nest of flies crawling where his face had been. They returned to work. The men on Wall 9 watched them and understood that losses which would annihilate ordinary armies merely delayed these warriors. Malachor Fell ordered the outer agricultural continents burned. Orbital strikes ignited grain oceans, livestock vaults, and algae reservoirs. Fire spread across the horizon for thousands of kilometers. Smoke climbed into the atmosphere and stained the daylight brown. The fortress already possessed stored provisions. The destruction changed no immediate ration count. It did not need to. Every defender saw the burning fields. Every laborer knew there would be no harvest after the siege. Days later, a procession appeared before Wall 9. Captured supply transports rolled across the killing ground beneath white identification lights. Their armor carried valid Imperial markings. Their transponders transmitted command codes recovered from Commodore Wren. Vox officers heard familiar clearance rights. Gate crews received authorization to prepare the outer portals. Then the Auspex operators examined the transport interiors. Each vehicle was full, not with grain, not with ammunition. Standing corpses filled every cargo compartment, packed shoulder to shoulder, all of them facing the fortress. As the first transport reached the gate, every dead head turned at once. The dead turned their heads toward Wall 9. For one heartbeat, the killing ground remained silent. Then, every gun upon the outer bastion opened fire. Heavy bolters hammered from armored embrasures. Autocannon stitched lines of explosive impacts across the lead transports. Lascannon beams punched through engine housings and cargo compartments, leaving molten holes through armor plate and the bodies packed within. Earthshaker shells descended among the convoy and burst with enough force to overturn vehicles weighing hundreds of tons. The first transport vanished inside a sphere of fire. The second split down its center. The dead came apart. They did not fall as bodies should. Their flesh had been dried, pressure-treated and packed with some brittle corruption that transformed them into powder beneath the force of detonation. Skin, bone and desiccated organs erupted into the air as a grey-brown cloud. It spread across the killing ground, lifted by the blast winds, and driven toward the Imperial trenches. More transports detonated. Their cargoes burst outward in expanding walls of human residue. Fragments of skulls spun through the smoke. Teeth rattled against ferrocrete. Finger bones descended like hail. A severed jaw struck one guardsman's helmet hard enough to crack the visor, then remained lodged there, its blackened teeth pressed against his eye. "Seal respirators," Colonel Hadron Malk shouted over the command channel. "All positions, full contamination protocol, seal your damned masks." Some obeyed, many could not. Thousands of conscripts on the forward firing steps had been issued respirators intended for industrial smoke, not battlefield toxins. Filters were missing. Face seals had perished in storage. Harnesses snapped when tightened. Men pressed sleeves over their mouths as the cloud descended and vanished around them. They began coughing almost at once. The plague flies came with the dust. They moved as a single black organism, a swarm broad enough to obscure the lumen towers. Their wings produced a droning note beneath the continuing artillery fire. They struck visors, crawled beneath gorgets, and packed themselves into weapon housings. Men slapped at exposed skin until their gloves were wet with crushed insects. A trooper beside Malk tore off his respirator. "There is something inside it." Malk seized him by the webbing. "Put it back on." The trooper held the mask toward him. The filter had softened into a lump of wet black pulp. Pale tendrils pushed through its vents, flexing as though tasting the air. One had entered the breathing tube. It writhed toward the trooper's mouth. Malk threw the respirator away. Across the trench line, men discovered the same thing. Filters swelled and ruptured. Fungal masses spread across the inner lenses. Soldiers screamed as growths formed against their lips, rooting into gums and nostrils. Some tore away their masks and inhaled the corpse dust. Others kept them sealed and drowned in their own blood when the wet organisms entered their throats. The convoy continued burning beyond the walls. Nothing living emerged from it. Nothing needed to. The first ration decree was issued 6 hours later. Its proclamation sounded across every Voxcaster, Manufactorum Shrine, and Hab Block address system on Morvain. The words came in the measured tones of an administratum functionary who had never missed a meal. By order of Lord General Castor Wren, all privately held food stocks were declared property of the Departamento Munitorum. Civilian distribution would be reduced to one daily measure of fortified nutrient paste. Active soldiers would receive compressed ration blocks according to operational status. Forge workers, atmosphere crews, medici personnel, and water purification laborers would receive supplemental allotments calculated according to productivity. Water would be measured. Unauthorized possession would be treated as theft from the Emperor's armies. Interference with distribution would be treated as sabotage. Sabotage in time of war carried death. In Callistin's central command vault, Prefect Militant Albus Crane presented the official projections. Existing stores will sustain the registered population for 212 days, he said. That calculation assumes continued reclamation, full corpse starch output, and no further loss of primary depots. Magos Dominus Hecaton 9 stood opposite him. Most of the Magos's body hung beneath a segmented chassis, supported by 6 metal limbs. Incense leaked from brass vents around his skull. A cluster of red optics rotated toward the prefect. Your calculation is false. Crane stiffened. The
figures have been audited. Your census excludes refugee concentrations beneath Manufactorum Districts 17 through 41. It excludes unregistered underhive settlements. It excludes penal labor imported during the previous tithe cycle. It excludes 43 million pilgrim transients trapped during closure of the Calliston Gate. These populations are administratively unconfirmed. They continue to consume confirmed oxygen. Wren watched the exchange from the head of the strategium table. Your estimate, Magos? 68 days before widespread caloric failure. 49 before water riots exceed available suppression assets. 31 before corpse reclamation becomes biologically unsafe. Crane's mouth tightened. That projection assumes catastrophic inefficiency. Hecaton 9 emitted a burst of binharic static. The catastrophe is observable. Wren looked toward the ration reports filling the hololith. Already, queues stretched through the lower districts. Already, military units had begun requisitioning civilian reserves without authorization. The public figure remains 212 days, he said. Hecaton 9's optics contracted. False data does not increase supplies. No, it delays panic. Panic delayed is panic concentrated. Captain Balian Rourke stood beside the wall display. The Magos is correct. Wren did not look at him. And yet I am giving the order. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Othric Sevenfold began his principal calculation. Captured census archives revolved above the strategium in columns of diseased light. Atmospheric readings, water consumption, ammunition expenditure, and casualty reports flowed through the projection. Human lives became quantities. Districts became rates of decline. Fortress walls became lines upon a ledger. Edron Pell stood near the tallyman, holding the slate upon which he had been ordered to record the siege. Othric moved brass counters across the abacus, mounted to his chest. 187 million liters of potable water consumed since closure. Another counter clicked. 3,400,000 respirator filters compromised. Another. 11,906 confirmed dead from particulate exposure. Predicted true figure exceeds 30,000. Pell watched the numbers change. You receive their reports? We receive everything. How? Othric's diseased eye turned toward him. The other was hidden beneath a lens filled with cloudy fluid. They transmit fear more freely than orders. Malachor Fell stood at the head of the strategium. Wall 9. Othric consulted the turning data. Structurally viable beyond projected campaign duration. Artillery capacity remains at 87%. Personnel capacity will decline below effective cohesion upon the 27th day. What will break first? Water discipline, followed by medici saturation, followed by ammunition theft and abandonment of secondary trenches. Fell rested both hands upon the haft of his scythe. No assault before the 27th day. Cairn Droll stood among the assembled champions, his bloated armor leaking vapor through split seams. The wall is wounded now. The wall is stone. The men upon it are coughing blood. They still believe coughing is not dying. Droll's helm tilted. You would wait while they repair. They cannot repair thirst. Fell looked toward the image of Morvain. Let the wall remain whole. Its defenders must understand that it failed because they did. The first disease appeared in the lower barracks before the second ration distribution. It began as thirst. Soldiers drained canteens and immediately demanded more. Their lips cracked. Their tongues swelled until speech became thick and clumsy. Black lines appeared along their gums.
Medici orderlies diagnosed chemical exposure from the corpse convoy and prescribed filtration tablets. The tablets did nothing. Men continued drinking. Some consumed entire canteens within minutes. Others forced open sanitation pipes and put their mouths against the flow. One squad killed its own water orderly when he refused an additional issue. The swelling moved downward. Abdomens distended. Skin stretched across ribs and pelvises until it shone. When Medici surgeons opened the first corpse, several liters of foul yellow fluid poured from the cavity. The dead man's organs floated inside him, pale and softened, detached from the tissues that should have held them in place. Industrial poisoning remained the official diagnosis. Quarantine was delayed. By the time command recognized contagion, whole regiments had shared canteens, ablution facilities, and filtration units. Colonel Malk received the report from Trench Sector Hellebore shortly after midday. The sector had missed 3 scheduled Vox confirmations. Its command post did not answer. Malk led a squad of trench veterans through the connecting galleries. All wore sealed rebreathers with fresh filters taken from an Imperial Fists supply cache. 2 carried flamers. A third dragged a Prometheum tank on a reinforced trolley. They smelled the sector before reaching it. Not decay, sweetness. The thick, sickly sweetness of fruit left to rot in heat. The blast door stood open. Hundreds of guardsmen remained at their firing steps beyond it. They faced the killing ground with las rifles shouldered. Officers stood behind them. An ammunition loader knelt beside an open crate with a charge pack in his hands. No one moved. Malk raised one fist. His squad halted. Sector command, respond. Silence. The nearest soldier's respirator lenses were black with flies. Malk approached and placed a hand upon the man's shoulder. The body collapsed. Armor, uniform, and flesh came apart, as though they had been holding one another upright. The corpse burst across the firing step. Flies erupted from inside the ribcage in a dense black stream. Something pale uncoiled beneath the tunic. Intestines spilled onto the deck. They moved. The wet ropes flexed around Malk's boots, searching blindly. One wrapped itself around his ankle with enough strength to pull. He fired his las pistol downward. The beam burned through the tissue. Black fluid sprayed across his greave. All along the trench, the dead began to fall. Bodies collapsed in sequence. Swarms burst from mouths, eye sockets, and split abdomens. Intestinal masses slid across the deck, knotting around rifles and boots. One dead officer remained standing after his torso opened, his spine held upright by a column of flies, packed so densely that they resembled flesh. "Burn it," Malk said. The flamer teams advanced. Prometheum roared through the trench. Fire engulfed the dead. Uniforms ignited. Skin blistered and burst. Flies burned in the air by the thousands, filling the sector with a foul rain of charred insects. The moving intestines twisted in the flames. Ammunition began to cook off beneath the bodies. Charge packs burst. Grenades detonated. A heavy bolter belt exploded link by link, sending rounds through burning corpses and ferrocrete. Malk did not withdraw until every firing step had become an open furnace. Commissar Severin Holt conducted the first ration executions in Manufactorum Square. 7 soldiers knelt beneath the bronze statue of an unknown saint. Their hands were bound behind them. Thousands of men from their regiment stood at attention, forced to witness the sentence. Holt walked along the line. "You stole 12 military ration blocks and 2 water measures," he said. The senior condemned soldier looked up. His face was gaunt. "For my son. You stole from fighting men. My son worked the shell presses. He was not assigned an additional ration. He was 12 years old." A murmur passed through the assembled regiment. Holt stopped before him. The soldier's eyes filled with tears. "Look at his corpse, Commissar. He died with his belly swollen from drinking bad water. Look at him and tell me I should have watched him starve first." Holt's expression did not change. Your grief does not amend the decree. You have no sons. I have duty. The soldier spat at his boots. Holt drew his bolt pistol. He could have answered. He could have admitted that he had visited the corpse halls and seen children stacked between dead soldiers because the reclamation grinders could no longer keep pace. He could have told the condemned man that he understood precisely why he had stolen. Compassion spoken before thousands would become permission. Permission would become looting. Looting would become famine. Holt fired. The bolt round entered the soldier's forehead and detonated within his skull. Blood and fragments of bone struck the saint's bronze robes. The next 6 executions followed. After the square had emptied, Holt summoned the regiment's quartermaster. Transfer half my personal ration allocation to the condemned men's surviving platoon. The quartermaster stared at him. Under what authority? Mine. For how long? Until none of them remain alive to receive it. Captain Rourke found the first shrine beneath Cistern Complex Gamma. Imperial fists breached the maintenance catacombs with melter charges, cutting through doors that had not opened for centuries. Behind them lay filtration chambers, abandoned on every official schematic. The walls were covered in membranes taken from water purification systems. They had been stretched like skin and stitched together with copper wire. Human teeth formed circles around fragments of rusted metal, arranged into the 3-lobed shape of Nurgle's mark. Some of the teeth were ancient, others still had blood upon their roots. Rourke examined the corroded symbols embedded in the stone. These were placed before the present foundations, said Brother Garrant. Rourke scraped away a layer of calcified filth. Beneath it, the same mark had been carved into older masonry. They did not begin this when the fleet arrived. How long? Long enough for the fortress to be built over them. A voice entered every Vox channel on Morvain. It belonged to Hethron Morn. He did not threaten. He did not demand surrender. Reservoir Kappa contains 311,000 infected bodies, he said. Reservoir Mordain carries the Black Thirst. Reservoir Helicon will fail its chemical blessing before the next ration bell. Commanders ordered the channels closed. His voice returned through emergency frequencies. Tomorrow, 14,209 soldiers will die in the lower barracks. 6,000 more will be executed during the water disturbances. The following day, the confirmed dead numbered 14,209. The executions numbered 6,017. Listening became a capital offense. Soldiers listened anyway. The bombardment resumed. For 7 minutes, plague mortars struck kitchens, water distribution stations, medici depots, and corpse processing plants. Then the Heralds ceased firing and moved their batteries. Imperial counter-barrages continued for hours, pulverizing empty soil. 7 minutes later, another district burned. At Wall 8, a convoy appeared from beneath an auxiliary transit tunnel. Its crews transmitted valid gene codes. They claimed to have survived within forgotten subterranean warehouses. Auspex scans showed grain, preserved protein and water tanks. Enough food to extend Morvain's survival. Wren gave the order. Wall 8's secondary gate began to open. Colonel Malk watched through magnoculars as the transports approached beneath white lights. One driver turned toward the wall. He smiled. The expression stretched too widely because the skin of his face had been cut away and stitched back onto his skull. Every driver in the convoy smiled with him. The gate had opened wide enough to admit the first transport when Colonel Hadron Malk saw the driver smile. The face had been removed and fastened back onto the skull with black wire. Its lips had been stretched beyond their natural reach, exposing gums packed with rusted staples. The man turned toward Wall 8, with one hand raised in greeting. Every driver behind him did the same. "Close the gate," Malk said. The gatemaster stared at the returning gene code confirmations. "Colonel, the convoy is authenticated. Close it. We have clearance from Central Command." Malk struck the emergency rune with the heel of his fist. Warning bells sounded through the gatehouse. Hydraulic engines groaned beneath the fortress. The vast adamantine portal shuddered and began to descend. The drivers stopped smiling. Their heads rolled backward until vertebrae cracked. Mouths opened. A single voice came from every vox channel in the gatehouse, wet and deep and crowded with flies. "Hungry." Malk seized the command lectern. "All batteries, fire upon the convoy. Burn everything beyond the threshold." The first Lascannon beam punched through the lead transport's cab and boiled the driver inside his uniform. Autocannon shells hammered the engine block. Heavy bolters opened the cargo hull from prow to stern, spraying armor fragments and black fluid across the approach road. The transport did not stop. Its tracks dragged the ruined vehicle forward until a demolisher emplacement fired from the wall. The shells struck beneath the armored cab. The explosion lifted the transport from the ground and tore it in half. The rear compartment burst open. The dead were packed inside, standing upright, compressed shoulder to shoulder, with iron hooks driven through their spines. The blast scattered them across the road. Bodies struck the ground broken, burning and dismembered. They began to rise. The transports behind them split apart before the Imperial guns could destroy them. Armor plates blew outward on explosive bolts. Internal restraints released. Poxwalkers spilled into the killing ground. They came packed in layers, bodies pressed so tightly together that those nearest the hulls had been flattened into sheets of ruptured flesh. The pressure released them in avalanches. Thousands hit the road, crawling over one another, snapping limbs under the weight of those behind them. More transports opened. Tens of thousands emerged. Some still wore Imperial uniforms. Others carried the remains of work overalls, pilgrim robes and voidsman coats. Their bodies bore the wounds that had killed them. One advanced with his abdomen torn away and his spine exposed from hip to ribcage. Another dragged both legs behind him while broken femurs ground against the ferrocrete. A headless corpse followed the pressure of the horde, hands opening and closing, as if trying to remember the shape of a weapon. Wall 8 fired everything. Heavy bolters ripped poxwalkers into red mist. Autocannon shells cut lanes through the mass. Flamers turned the gate approach into a river of burning bodies. Mortars burst among the rear ranks and threw limbs over the battlements. The dead continued forward. Those without legs crawled. Those without arms pushed themselves along on exposed ribs. Burning corpses stumbled against the closing gate and clawed at the descending adamantine. Fingers were crushed beneath its weight. Heads burst against the threshold. Bodies packed into the narrowing gap until the portal came down upon a mound of flesh and stopped short of full closure. "Obstruction in the gate track," the gatemaster shouted. Malk watched poxwalkers force themselves through the remaining space. The pressure peeled skin from their backs. Bones broke. Bodies entered the fortress, compressed and mangled, then unfolded on the inner side and attacked anything within reach. Clear the track with Promethium. Colonel, our own men are still outside. Then they are already dead. Flamer teams advanced beneath covering fire. Beyond the gate, something larger moved through the corpse smoke. Cairn Droll had not asked permission to advance. He descended from the Herald's forward redoubt, with his power maul resting across one shoulder. The weapon had once been a legionary thunderhammer, but centuries of corruption had swollen its striking head into a mass of pitted iron, horn, and calcified tissue. Thick cables ran from its haft into the armor of Droll's forearm. His plague marines followed. They came in ranks of green and pale copper, their armor scarred by Imperial artillery and wet with leaking corruption. Hellbrutes lumbered behind them, sarcophagi split by the growth of flesh that had forced its way through plating. One dragged a multi-melter built into a limb of fused bone and machinery. Another bore a power scourge whose tendrils ended in gnashing mechanical jaws. Demon engines crawled from trenches around them. Fetid bloat drones rose into the smoke, rotors chopping through ash and human fragments. Myphitic blight haulers bounded behind the advance on clawed limbs, exhaust vents coughing clouds of toxic vapor. Droll opened a channel to his warriors.
The gate is wounded. No one answered with a cheer. The heralds did not need one. Advance through the wound. Poxwalkers absorbed the fortress fire. Behind them, plague marines raised blight launchers and fired in disciplined volleys. Corrupted projectiles arced toward the wall, burst against firing apertures, and filled gun chambers with clouds of virulent shrapnel. Men died without visible wounds. Their flesh blackened beneath uniforms. Eyes burst. Teeth loosened and rattled. Against respirator masks, plague spewers washed the lower battlements in streams of diseased slurry. The liquid clung to ferrocrete, armor, and exposed skin. Guardsmen fell screaming as flesh softened and sloughed from bone. Bolters followed. Single rounds struck firing points. Each detonation threw pieces of men across the parapets. Droll walked behind the poxwalkers and watched the gate struggle to close. The fortress was open. That was enough. On the bridge of the Sepulchre of Patience, Edron Pell watched the unauthorized assault unfold across the hololith. He expected Malachor Fel to rage. The siege lord did not move. Cairn Droll's icon crossed the projected killing ground. Around it, green markers denoted plague marine squads, hellbrutes and demon engines committed without sanction. Imperial defense runes vanished beneath the first impact, then reappeared as secondary positions activated. Pell glanced toward Fel. "You did not order this." "No." "Will you stop him?" "No." Pell looked back at the display. "Then he may take the gate." Fel's helm turned toward him. "He has confused an open door with a defeated enemy." The siege lord's voice carried neither anger nor contempt. It held something colder, disappointment. The fortress still believes it can win. If Droll enters now, resistance will withdraw deeper and harden around new walls. The defenders will name survival a victory. They will sanctify every retreat. Othric Sevenfold moved a brass counter. Fel said, "Record every herald lost in this assault." The tallyman's quill scratched across a strip of cured skin. Designation? Casualties of impatience. Pell watched Imperial formations gathering behind Wall 8. You knew they would answer. They must. How? Because men behind walls fear appearing weak more than they fear dying. Lord General Castor Wren stood above the tactical display as armor columns assembled beneath Calistin. The corpse assault had penetrated the gate approach, but not the inner defense galleries. Wall 8 remained operational. The Herald's vanguard had advanced beyond the support of its main batteries. Wren saw the opportunity. Captain Balian Rourke saw the trap. They have committed too little, the Imperial Fist said. Enough to threaten the gate. Not enough to take it. Wren studied the enemy icons. Their commander has made an error. One commander has. You counsel inaction. I counsel preparation for what lies beyond the obvious. Wren turned toward Colonel Malk's transmission. The officer's face appeared through static and smoke. Wall 8 can hold for another hour, Malk said. After that, the obstruction beneath the portal becomes irrelevant. They will breach the gatehouse from within. Wren made his decision. Commence iron reprisal. The fortress opened. Armored gates behind Wall 8 withdrew. Engine noise rolled through the defense corridors like approaching thunder. Lehman Russ battle tanks advanced in massed columns, hulls marked with regiment sigils and devotional script. Battle cannon elevated as they passed beneath the wounded gate. Demolishers followed, their short-barreled siege cannon built for killing at ranges where crews could see the faces of those they destroyed. Hellhounds moved alongside infantry carriers, fuel tanks armored but never truly safe. Behind them came super-heavy engines whose tracks crushed corpses into paste. A Baneblade named Emperor's Accounting led the central column. Its main cannon fired before it cleared the gate. The shell crossed the Poxwalker mass and struck a Hellbrute in the chest. The demon engine vanished within the blast. Armor, rotted flesh, and shattered machinery fell across the battlefield in burning fragments. Imperial artillery descended a heartbeat later. Earthshaker rounds marched across the killing ground.
Medusa shells broke fortified positions. Manticore rockets screamed overhead and burst among the Heralds' forward ranks with enough force to tear Plague Marines from the earth. The counter-offensive surged through Wall 8. Lehman Russ tanks spread into firing lines and used their battle cannon to break the enemy formation. Shells struck green armor and tore corrupted legionaries apart. One Plague Marine disappeared above the waist. The remains continued walking for 3 steps before falling beneath a tank's tracks. Lascannon beams burned through Blight Haulers. Hellhound Inferno cannon washed Poxwalker concentrations in Prometheum until the dead became a moving field of flame. Infantry followed the armor. Guardsmen advanced over bodies with bayonets fixed, firing laser guns into anything still moving. Heavy weapon teams established positions in shell holes. Grenade launchers cracked. Plasma guns burned blue-white wounds through the smoke. For the first time since the siege began, the Heralds yielded ground. Droll's vanguard withdrew. The movement passed through the Imperial lines like electricity. "They are breaking!" The cry rose from platoon to platoon. Men who had watched Plague Marines rise from artillery craters saw them retreat and believed they had discovered the enemy's secret. Enough fire could force them back. Enough courage could drive them from Morvain. The armored advance accelerated. Colonel Malk moved with the second wave, commanding from the cupola of a Lehman Russ Vanquisher. He watched Poxwalkers vanish beneath the tracks. He watched Plague Marines fall back through smoke without disorder. Something was wrong. The Heralds were not running. They were measuring. "Forward companies, halt at the 3rd range marker," Malk ordered. Static answered. The leading tanks continued beyond the blackened remains of an old trench line. The first plague mine detonated beneath a Lehman Russ. The blast did not destroy the vehicle. Its tracks lifted, twisted, and came down broken. A geyser of yellow filth struck the underside and poured into the engine compartment through maintenance seams. The crew reported contamination. Then they began screaming. Mines erupted across the advance. Tracks snapped. Road wheels melted. Corrosive fluid entered exhausts, vents, and weapon housings. Tanks halted in clusters, trapping those behind them. The ground opened. Myphitic blight haulers emerged from concealed trenches beneath netting of diseased flesh and rubble. Multi-melters fired at close range. Armored hulls became furnaces. Men inside tanks burned before they could release their harnesses. Hethron Morn raised his staff beyond the decay fields. The air changed. Fog poured from shell craters and ruptured corpses. It spread against the wind, green-grey and thick with buzzing shapes. Auspex screens filled with contacts. One enemy became 10. 10 became hundreds. Gunners fired into phantom returns. Battle cannon shells struck empty ground. Lascannon beams crossed between friendly formations. A demolisher turned toward an approaching shape and fired. The target was another Imperial tank. The shell struck its turret and reduced the crew to pulp inside the hull. "Identify before firing," Malk shouted. "Visual confirmation only." The fog swallowed his command tank. Something struck the hull. The loader screamed over the internal vox. Malk looked down through the cupola. A plague marine was climbing the side armor. Bolter rounds hit the legionary and broke open one pauldron. Beneath it, pale worms spilled across the ceramite. The warrior reached the turret, drove a plague knife into the hatch seal, and began cutting. Malk fired his last pistol into the exposed neck joint. The first beam burned flesh. The second struck something hard beneath it. The third entered the plague marine's helm. The warrior dropped from the tank and vanished beneath its tracks. All around them, Cairn Droll's vanguard turned. Plague marines closed upon the immobilized armor. They climbed tanks beneath point-blank fire. Gauntlets tore away hatches. Plague knives corroded locking mechanisms. Blight grenades were forced through vision slits. One herald ripped open a commander's cupola and poured a canister of diseased fluid inside. The crew hammered against sealed escape hatches as the liquid rose around their boots, their waists, their throats. Their screams became bubbling static. Another reached through a broken hatch and dragged a loader outward.
The opening was too narrow. The man's shoulders struck the rim. The plague marine pulled harder. Bones snapped. Skin tore from the loader's arms and chest. Teeth scattered across the turret. What emerged no longer resembled a complete human being. Droll reached and immobilized Demolisher. Its siege cannon fired past him and destroyed a demon engine. The blast blackened his armor, but did not slow him. He mounted the hull. The commander opened the cupola and fired a bolt pistol into Droll's chest. One round penetrated. The next burst against the gorget. Droll swung his maul. The weapon struck the turret roof. Armor folded inward. He struck again. The turret caved around the crew. Blood sprayed through vision blocks. The commander disappeared beneath crushed metal, his body reduced to flesh, forced into every seam. Droll raised the maul for a third blow. Thunderhawks came out of the fog. Their engines shook the battlefield. Heavy bolters and assault cannon fired into the Heralds at low altitude. One gunship crossed above the trapped armor, its weapons cutting a corridor through poxwalkers and plague marines. Yellow figures dropped from its assault ramp. Imperial fists landed among the dead. Captain Rourke hit the ground with a storm shield locked before him. Bolter fire struck the shield and burst around its edges. His warriors formed around him without needing shouted instruction. "Advance by squads," Rourke ordered. "First line, suppress. Second line, recover. Third line, demolitions." Their bolters fired in disciplined sequence. Not wild volleys, not rage. Every explosive round struck a target. Helm lenses broke. Weapon arms came apart. Plague marines staggered beneath repeated impacts until melter charges were placed against their armor and detonated. Rourke did not try to reclaim the battlefield. He opened a road through it. Armor crews, abandon immobilized vehicles, infantry withdraw by marked corridor. No halt, no retrieval of materiel. A tank commander protested over the Vox. "Those engines are sacred. They are lost. We can recover them. You will recover nothing if you die beside them." Demolition teams moved from hull to hull. Melter charges were fixed to ammunition stores, fuel systems, and turret rings. The first abandoned Lehman Russ detonated as Imperial troops withdrew past it. The blast consumed 3 poxwalkers and a plague marine climbing onto the rear deck. Wall 8 fired over the retreating formations. The Herald batteries could have closed the corridor. They remained silent. Wren watched the withdrawal from the command vault and saw salvation in that silence. "Their ammunition is depleted." Rourke heard the transmission as he walked backward through the gate, bolter firing. "No," he said. The final Imperial tanks crossed the threshold. Wounded soldiers came behind them in thousands, carried on stretchers, dragged by comrades, or stumbling under their own strength. Rourke looked toward the distant Herald lines. Fell had allowed them to return. The reason became clear before the gate closed. "They want the wounded inside," Rourke said. No one answered. "They want the blood, the armor, the witnesses." The returning troops entered Caliston to cheers. Civilians crowded the transit galleries. Priests raised icons. Manufacturing workers shouted that the enemy had been defeated. Men reached out to touch surviving tank hulls as if victory could pass through steel. Then the wounded began to convulse. A guardsman arched upon his stretcher. His chest split from throat to abdomen. Flies erupted from the cavity and filled the medici hall. Another sat upright while surgeons worked upon him. His eyes had turned black. He seized an orderly and bit through the man's cheek. Across the receiving wards, swollen bodies ruptured. Diseased fluid covered floors, instruments and open wounds. Corpses rolled from surgical tables and attacked the living with broken hands. The cheers became screams. Aboard the sepulchre of patients, Othric Sevenfold moved a brass counter. "Wall 8, he said. "Seeded." His quill scratched across the tally. Projected loss of operational cohesion revised forward by 11 days. Malachor Fell watched the fortress gates seal around the infected survivors. Cairn Droll had failed to take the wall. The Heralds had entered it anyway. Water ceased to flow in the lower hives shortly before the 6th ration bell. The pipes did not empty all at once. Pressure failed district by district. descending through Calistin's buried levels, like paralysis spreading through a dying body. Faucets coughed brown air. Ablution channels shuddered. Communal cisterns exhaled a final breath of vapor and fell silent. Within an hour, the queues began. They formed outside ration kiosks, manufactorum, reservoirs and shrine fountains whose water had been declared sacred until the moment armed men seized them. Thousands became millions. Millions became processions without visible ends, winding through tunnels beneath devotional arches and ventilation shafts dripping condensation too foul to drink. Men brought dented canisters, shell casings, helmets and buckets made from cut sections of pipe. Some carried children too weak to stand. Others carried corpses, hoping the dead would preserve a place in the line. The first water tanker entered Habitation Vault Calthus, beneath an escort of planetary defense troopers. The crowd surged before it stopped. Barricades collapsed. Men were dragged beneath the press and trampled until their ribs broke inward. A laborer climbed onto the tanker and tried to open the upper hatch with a cutting torch. A trooper shot him through the spine. He fell among the crowd and vanished beneath grasping hands before his body reached the ground. The tanker's distribution valves opened. The line ceased to exist. Thousands rushed forward. They fought with fists, knives, and lengths of industrial chain. Men pushed canisters beneath the flow, while others drank directly from the gutter. One was forced face first into a collection trough and held beneath the water until his struggling stopped. Those around him continued filling their vessels over his body. The arbitrators gave 3 warnings through amplified helms. No one heard the first. The second became a distorted command beneath the roar. The third ended in gunfire. Combat shotguns thundered across the vault. The foremost civilians came apart. Chests burst. Faces vanished behind clouds of blood and teeth. Planetary defense lasguns fired into the bodies still climbing over the dead. The crowd recoiled, then surged again, because those at the rear could not see the killing. By the time order returned, bodies were piled against the ration kiosk above the height of a man. Water continued pouring across the floor. Far beyond Calistin's walls, the Heralds of Despair expended no ammunition. Magos Dominus Hecaton 9 entered Filtration Shrine Primus through a hatch sealed since the foundation of the fortress. His mechadendrites unfolded before him, their lenses emitting thin red beams through the darkness. Maintenance servitors stood in alcoves around the chamber. Their limbs were rusted. Their skin had dried against metal frames. Each wore a devotional hood stitched over its head. They should have been dormant. They were whispering. Purity through blessed addition. Purity through fertile suspension. Purity through the patient bloom. The words moved from servitor to servitor in a broken circuit, repeating as Hecaton 9 crossed the shrine. The Magos extended an interface tendril into the nearest filtration altar. Binharik Kant passed between his systems and the machine spirit beneath the stone. Data returned in corrupted bursts. Chemical litanies, purification cycles, maintenance deviations extending across years. Hecaton 9 paused. The designated cleansing compounds had been replaced during thousands of routine services. Not entirely. The substitutions were too minor to trigger standard alarms. 1 unit in every 100, 1 canister in every 1,000. Dormant organic cultures introduced beneath the guise of stabilizing agents. Spores hidden inside sacred oils and filter resin. The machine spirit had accepted them because the rites had been performed correctly. The corruption had worn the mask of obedience. Hecaton 9 opened the servitor's hood. The face beneath had no eyes. Fungal filaments grew from the sockets and passed backward into the skull. Beneath the jaw, someone had carved 3 joined circles into the flesh and packed the cuts with copper dust. Chronological contamination estimate, the Magos transmitted. His internal cogitators answered. Minimum duration, 83 years. Maximum duration, indeterminate. The Herald's fleet had been in the system for days. The fortress had been preparing for them for generations.
Hecaton 9 accessed the noospheric maintenance network. He found prayers moving through it. They did not appear in the form of human language. They lived inside diagnostic permissions, repeated errors and correction loops. Machine systems invoked them without awareness. Pump stations requested blessings from corrupted filtration nodes. Servitors exchanged fragments of the same hidden catechism during routine handshakes. Defense cogitators accepted updates signed by dead engine seers. Morvaine's infrastructure was not merely infected. Parts of it had been worshipping. The Magos withdrew his interface tendril. For the first time since the siege began, his calculations contained a quantity he could not express. Revulsion. Captain Balian Rourke entered the cistern catacombs at the head of 11 Imperial fists. Their power armor scraped the tunnel walls. The passage had been built for maintenance servitors, not Adeptus Astartes, forcing the warriors into single file. Bolters remained raised, but could not be brought to bear without striking the brother ahead. Colonel Hadron Malk followed with 40 trench veterans. Their respirators hissed. Their boots sank into filth. The air passing through their filters already tasted of decay, a greasy sweetness that clung to the backs of their throats. "Movement beneath us," Brother Garant said. Malk glanced down. Black water flowed through the channel between their boots. Something disturbed the surface. Rourke raised one fist. The column halted. Hands emerged from the sewage grates. Cultists tore themselves upward through openings too narrow for whole men. Skin stripped from shoulders. Bones broke against iron. They came laughing despite their bodies folding and rupturing around the bars. The first seized a guardsman by the ankle. The soldier fired downward. His lasbolt burned through the cultist's scalp, but the hands continued pulling. Another shape rose behind him and drove a sharpened length of pipe through the soldier's groin. The point burst from beneath his flak vest. The Imperial fists opened fire. Bolter detonations filled the tunnel with thunder. Explosive rounds entered torsos and burst. Organs struck the walls in wet sheets. Bone fragments rang against ceramite. The narrow passage magnified every impact until Malk felt the sound inside his teeth. More cultists came through the sewage channels. Some had threaded industrial cables through their limbs, binding themselves into groups that moved like many-bodied insects. Others carried rusted tools, cleavers and grenades made from filter housings packed with diseased matter. A servitor stepped from a maintenance recess. Its abdomen split open. The flesh had been cut and hinged around the ribs. When the body opened, a yellow cloud rolled from the cavity. "Seal breach," Rourke ordered. Brother Lucan fired his bolter into the servitor. The round burst inside it and spread the cloud farther. Malk's helmet display flashed contamination warnings. The nearest guardsman fell. His hands clawed at his throat as blisters rose beneath his skin. They swelled, joined and burst, releasing fluid into his respirator. Defense automata awakened ahead. Red optics ignited behind a bulkhead. "Biological contaminants detected," a machine voice declared. "Purification authorized." Heavy stubbers fired. The first round struck an Imperial fist's breastplate. More followed, hammering the narrow tunnel. Rourke advanced into the fire with his storm shield raised. "Loyal transponder signal," he transmitted. "Contaminant classification confirmed." The automata fired again. Rourke reached the first machine and crushed its weapon mount with his power fist. Brother Garant drove a chainsword through the second. The weapon's teeth bit into armor, then shrieked as they caught upon something beneath the plating. Wire, bone, industrial cabling threaded through human tissue. The automaton's torso had been packed with the remains of several men, their skeletons wired into its control systems. The chainsword jammed. The machine struck Garant with a loading claw and tore open his gorget. Brother Lucan fired at point-blank range. The automaton's core exploded. Fragments crossed the tunnel and struck Lucan's helmet. A vessel of corrosive fluid broke above him. Acid poured across his head. His helm softened. Lenses ran like wax. Lucan tore the ruined plate away before it sealed around his face. Half his features came with it.
One eye disappeared in melted flesh. His cheek opened to the teeth. Skin sloughed from his jaw and throat. "Brother, withdraw," Rourke ordered. Lucan raised his bolter. "I remain combat capable." His voice came wetly through his ruined mouth. He continued firing. The column pushed deeper. The catacombs widened into an ancient pumping chamber, crowded with pillars, gantries, and stagnant reservoirs. Shrines covered the walls. Filtration membranes had been stretched between pipes, each marked with circles of human teeth. Malk saw movement behind the central pumps. A plague marine stepped into view. The legionary wore bright green armor edged in pale copper, though corrosion had eaten through most of the original colors. His belly plate had split, exposing coils of intestine wrapped around ammunition feeds. A great plague cleaver rested in both hands. "Concentrated fire," Malk said. Laser guns struck the warrior. Dozens of beams blackened armor and burned into flesh. A plasma gun fired. Blue light tore away part of the plague marine's shoulder. Bolter rounds from the Imperial fists hammered his chest. He advanced, not quickly. He did not need speed. The first guardsman tried to retreat and collided with those behind him. The plague marine crossed the remaining distance and swung his cleaver. The blade passed through 3 men. One separated at the waist. The second lost both arms and most of his chest. The third remained standing for a moment, with the cleaver buried in his abdomen, then came apart when the legionary wrenched it free. Malk fired his plasma pistol. The shot struck the plague marine's knee and blew away the joint. The warrior fell onto one leg. He swung again. The cleaver took a veteran's head and opened another from shoulder to hip. Rourke charged through the bodies. His storm shield struck the plague marine hard enough to break the pillar behind him. Brother Garrant placed a melter charge against the legionary's chest. Clear. The charge detonated. White fire filled the chamber. When Malk's vision returned, the plague marine was gone above the pelvis. The lower body remained upright against the pillar, intestines twitching around the ruined armor. Malk looked at the dead surrounding it. The Herald had crossed less than 20 meters. It had killed 9 men. The colonel understood then. The enemy's slowness was not deficiency. It was certainty that distance would eventually surrender. Brother Lucan dropped to one knee. His exposed face had turned grey. Blood ran from his mouth in thick ropes. Rourke reached him. "Secondary heart failure," Lucan said. "Medici withdrawal." "Denied." That was an order. Lucan looked toward the remaining tunnel. One weapon remains. His primary heart beat twice more, then stopped. His fingers tightened around the bolter, even after death. They found Golver in the Medici station beneath the next cistern. The Biologus putrefier stood among opened corpses, glass vessels and surgical frames. His armor was draped with canisters of cloudy fluid. Injector tools extended from his gauntlets. A rack of plague grenades hung against one hip like swollen fruit. A Medici officer lay on the floor before him. The man's abdomen had been opened from sternum to pelvis. Metal clamps held the wound apart. His organs remained inside, though Vere had rearranged them with deliberate care. The officer was still alive. His eyes found Malk. "Kill me." Golver turned. "Do not interrupt the lesson." Rourke raised his bolter. Vere pressed one injector into the officer's exposed liver. The dying man convulsed. "You misunderstand our intention," the putrefier said. "You believe an army waits outside your walls." His voice bubbled through liquid-filled respirator tubes. "It does," Malk said. "No, an army matures within them." Vere gestured toward the opened officer. "Every corpse is future manpower. Every shelter is an incubation chamber. Every hospital is a breeding site. We need not replace your population." The officer's organs began moving beneath the clamps. "We shall persuade it to change allegiance." Rourke fired. Vere threw himself behind a surgical frame as bolter rounds destroyed the station. Glass vessels burst. Diseased cultures splashed across the floor and began eating through metal. The putrefier withdrew through an access shaft,
leaving the dying officer behind. His abdomen rose. Something inside him pushed against the ribs. Malk put a lasbolt through his skull before it emerged. Lord General Wren received the purge reports alongside new casualty totals from the lower hive. Infection had crossed 27 habitation districts. Water riots had become open rebellion. Poxwalkers were appearing inside sealed shelters. Wren stood over the command lectern. "Burn the infected levels." Silence followed. A prefect cleared his throat. "Lord General, estimated population within the designated blocks exceeds 80 million. Seal the transit shafts. Pump promethium through the ventilation network. Not all districts show symptoms. They will." Captain Rourke entered the vault while the order was being transmitted. "You will kill millions of uninfected citizens. I will deny the plague tens of millions more. You do not know that." "No," Wren said. "I know nothing now except that hesitation multiplies corpses." Promethium entered the lower hive. At first, the inhabitants smelled fuel through the vents. Then the ignition charges fired. Flame traveled through ventilation shafts and maintenance ducts. Hab blocks became furnaces. Families crowded against sealed doors, while heat peeled paint from walls and cooked the moisture from their eyes. Plague victims burned beside men who had never touched infected water. The ecclesiarchy declared the operation a cleansing victory. Smoke poured from the upper ventilation towers for 3 days. Everyone in Calistin knew what had been cleansed. Hecaton 9 refused the order to destroy Manufactorum Helix. "The facility is infected," Rourke said. "The facility contains 71 functioning shell presses and reactor components irreplaceable within projected siege duration. It is transmitting corrupted code. Isolation protocols are active. They have already failed elsewhere. Without ammunition, the fortress expires." Rourke stepped closer to the Magos. "If that manufactorum turns its weapons inward, I will demolish it myself." Hecaton 9's weapon limbs rotated toward him. "Interference with Mechanicus assets will be classified as hostile action." For several seconds, the Imperial Fist and the Magos regarded one another beneath the red light of the command vault. Wren watched the defenders of Morvain begin dividing into rival fortresses. The dead rose faster than the crematoria could burn them. Corpse processing plants clogged with bodies that resisted conveyor hooks. Poxwalkers crawled from grinding hoppers with limbs removed and skulls crushed. Ash pits stirred beneath layers of human fat melted together by heat. Crematorium workers tried to clear one blockage with cutting torches. The ash opened. Shapes climbed from it. Several corpses fused into single masses by softened flesh. Arms protruded from backs. Faces opened inside swollen torsos. They seized the workers and dragged them into furnace mouths, while the machines continued reciting funerary prayers. Whole mortuary districts stopped answering. No herald crossed the walls to claim them. None was required. Wall 7's interior batteries turned toward Calistin shortly before midnight. The gunners shouted conflicting override rights. Tech priests attempted to sever noospheric links. Corrupted machine spirits accepted command codes transmitted through infected maintenance networks. Macro cannon fired inward. The first shells struck hab spires packed with refugees. Towers folded into one another. Millions died beneath collapsing ferrocrete before they understood that the fortress itself was shooting them. Loyal artillery destroyed Wall 7's batteries after 6 minutes. By then, a district the size of a nation was burning. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Edron Pell watched the devastation bloom across the planet. Malachor Fel had not fired upon the wall. He had breached it all the same. The first shell fell upon Calistin 3 hours before dawn. It struck a habitation tower behind Wall 6, passed through 11 inhabited levels, and detonated inside a water reclamation vault. The blast opened the tower from within. Ferrocrete floors collapsed one upon another, crushing thousands beneath descending layers of stone, machinery, and human remains. Water burst through ruptured conduits and carried the dead into the streets below. The second shell struck a medici complex. The third entered an ammunition lift. Then the sky began to rain. Malachor fell, stood upon the command bridge of the Sepulchre of Patience, while the siege batteries awakened across Morvain. Plague-burst crawlers fired from concealed emplacements beyond the outer defense belts. Captured artillery pieces discharged from pits roofed in human hide. Corrupted macro cannon aboard the plague fleet sent shells through the atmosphere in burning lines. Orbital batteries, field mortars, and demon engines entered the sequence one after another, each firing according to a schedule calculated by Othric Sevenfold. The barrage never reached its maximum possible intensity. Pell understood why after the first day. Maximum fire would have exhausted magazines, overheated barrels, and given the defenders clear periods in which the guns could be resupplied. Fell wanted no crescendo, followed by silence. He wanted constancy. One shell, every few breaths. One district struck whenever another believed itself safe. Enough impact to stop sleep. Enough destruction to prevent repair. Enough noise to make silence itself seem like a forgotten mercy. Othric's counters moved without pause. Wall 6 northern batteries reduced to 71%. Click. Civilian shelter capacity exceeded by 412 million. Click. Corpse reclamation delayed beyond sanitary viability in 23 districts. Click. Average uninterrupted sleep among active defenders, 47 minutes. Pell watched the bombardment spread across the hololith. You calculate sleep? Othric's quill scratched over a strip of parchment taken from human skin. Sleep restores the belief that tomorrow may differ from today. And when they can no longer sleep, they cease imagining tomorrow. Fell looked down upon the planet. Continue the rain. The shells fell in deliberate succession. High explosive came first. The rounds broke roofs, shattered towers, and opened sealed structures to the atmosphere. Whole hab blocks split apart, exposing rooms where families still crouched beneath tables and prayer alcoves. Shockwaves flung bodies through walls. Men were found embedded in ferrocrete by the force of impact, their bones driven through their own flesh. Incendiaries followed. Promethium and alchemical fire entered the opened buildings. Flame traveled down lift shafts, through ventilation ducts, and across floors slick with blood. Survivors fled into subterranean shelters, while burning clothing adhered to their skin. Chemical munitions came next. Shells burst above the shelter entrances and released pale vapors heavier than air. The gas descended stairwells and ventilation shafts. Men died pressed against sealed doors, while those inside struggled to keep the locks closed. Families used wet cloth, urine and blood to cover their mouths. The vapor passed through all of it. Then came the spore rounds. They struck after medici teams, and rescue crews entered the ruins. The shells opened without explosion. Their casings unfolded like metal flowers and released clouds of black seed. Spores entered lungs, wounds, ration packs and water tanks. They rooted in the dead and the living alike. Corpse shells came last. The projectiles burst above the trenches and scattered human remains across kilometers of defensive works. Arms, skulls and torsos fell through smoke. Some bore the uniforms of Morvain's missing voidsmen. Others had been stitched together from unrecognizable bodies. Teeth chattered in severed jaws. Not randomly, they formed words. Blessed is the patient wound. Blessed is the grave without a door. Blessed is the hunger that outlives hope. Guardsmen smashed the heads with rifle butts. The teeth continued speaking after the skulls broke. Wall 6 disappeared beneath mud. Rain mixed with ruptured water mains, sewage and blood, until the defensive trenches became black lakes. Men sank to the waist while attempting to hold firing steps. The wounded drowned beneath the boots of their own comrades. Bodies vanished into the slurry and rose hours later when gas bloated them enough to float. Artillery crews chained themselves to gun platforms. The concussive force of each nearby impact lifted men from their feet and threw them against armor plate. Chains kept them at their stations. Some broke ribs against their restraints. Others continued loading while blood ran from ears and noses. A loader at Battery Orison lost 3 fingers to shrapnel. He stared at the wet bones protruding from his hand. The breach officer shouted for the next shell. The loader hooked the lifting ring with exposed finger bones and dragged the round into position. The gun fired. The recoil tore the remaining flesh from his hand. He loaded another. Colonel Hadron Malk walked the trenches beneath a ceiling of fire. His greatcoat had become too heavy with mud to move easily. He discarded it and continued in flak armor stained by smoke and human residue. Every few steps, the ground trembled beneath him. A shell struck the neighboring communication trench. The blast threw men into the air. One came down without his lower body, landed across the parapet, and continued screaming until another impact buried him. Malk reached the command dugout. Commissar Severin Holt stood inside with his bolt pistol drawn. 3 officers knelt before him. The first had concealed the loss of an ammunition depot. The second had abandoned a forward observation post. The third had falsified casualty reports to prevent his regiment from being transferred into the most heavily shelled sector. Holt shot them in order. Each bolt round entered the skull and detonated. The final officer's blood sprayed across the casualty board. A line of deserters waited outside. They did not plead. One stepped forward before Holt called his name. "Make it clean, Commissar." Holt regarded him. "You abandoned your position." "Yes." "You left your squad under bombardment." "Yes." "You understand the sentence?" The deserter looked toward the trench mouth, where men screamed beneath falling shells. "I understand the mercy." Something changed in Holt's face. Not compassion, recognition. He fired. The deserter died before his body struck the mud. The next man moved eagerly into place. Holt lowered the pistol. "Return them to their units." The provost sergeant stared at him. "Commissar, any man who deserts again is to be chained to the forward parapet. That is not the usual sentence. The usual sentence has become desirable." Holt looked at the smoking muzzle of his bolt pistol. His authority had always rested upon fear of death. The plague had made death clean, simple and brief. In comparison with the siege, execution had become a reward. The Warhound Titans marched on the 3rd day. The maniple had waited beneath armored vaults near the central citadel, preserved for a decisive counterstroke. Lord General Wren committed them when plague batteries began breaching the shield relays of Wall 6. 3 engines emerged through the western armor gate. They were gods shaped for war. The lead warhound, Fidelis Rex, strode upon towering legs plated in scarred adamantium. Its reactor growled beneath armor engraved with campaign honors. A turbo laser destructor occupied one weapon mount. A plasma blast gun glowed upon the other. Void shields shimmered around the Titan as shells struck and vanished in bursts of light. 2 sister engines followed. Skitari cohorts advanced around their feet. Armored carriers and infantry columns moved in their wake. The sound of the Titan's war horns rolled across the battlefield and shook dust from the walls of Calistin. For the first time during the 7-day reign, Imperial soldiers cheered. The Titans entered the siege lines. The turbo laser of Fidelis Rex fired. A red beam crossed the plain and erased a plague redoubt. Cultists, artillery pieces and fortifications became expanding vapor. The plasma blast gun discharged into a poxwalker concentration and transformed tens of thousands of bodies into a lake of burning matter. The second Warhound destroyed 3 plague burst crawlers in a single advance. The third trampled through a trench line, crushing demon engines and infected infantry beneath its feet. The Heralds did not meet them. No Death Guard champion strode into the open to challenge the engines. No corrupted Titan answered their horns. Myphitic blight haulers moved through the shell craters beneath the smoke. They attacked the joints. Multi-melter beams struck knee pistons and ankle housings. Bile spurted across stabilization mechanisms. The warhounds killed scores of the demon engines, but more emerged from concealed tunnels and the ruins of destroyed redoubts. Plague shells burst against the Titans' heads. Their void shields absorbed the impacts, yet the spores remained. Growth spread across sensor housings. Flies packed optical arrays. Auspex readings multiplied and contradicted one another. Inside Fidelis Rex, the Princeps commanded his Moderati through a storm of warning chimes. Left quadrant blind. Compensate through secondary Auspex. Secondary returns corrupted. Advance by inertial heading. The engine took another step. Malachor Fel gave a single order from orbit. Open the Earth. The Sepulchre of Patience fired. Lance strikes descended around Fidelis Rex, not upon it. The beams burned through the plane and shattered buried strata. Artillery shells followed, striking the weakened ground beneath the Titan's feet. The Earth collapsed. One leg sank to the knee. The warhound lurched. Skitarii vanished beneath falling soil. Tanks slid into the opening and overturned. The Titan's stabilizers screamed as its entire mass twisted against the trapped limb. The Princeps tried to step free. The ground collapsed farther. Fidelis Rex fell. Its war horn became a grinding howl as the engine struck the plane. One weapon arm buried itself beneath rubble. The head remained elevated, tilted toward the walls it had marched to defend. Poxwalkers came from every direction. They climbed the fallen Titan. Defense guns cut them apart by the thousands, but the bodies of the dead formed ramps for those behind. Hands clawed into armor seams. Corpses packed around joints and ventilation grills. Plague Marines advanced among them. They carried melter charges and corroded boarding tools. The whole of Morvain watched. Picked feeds from Wall 6 displayed the fallen god engine across fortress screens. Manufactorum laborers stopped at their stations. Soldiers forgot the shells falling around them. Billions saw Fidelis Rex trapped beneath a tide of dead men. The Princeps opened every Vox channel. His voice sounded across the world. By the Omnissiah's hand, I walk. The Warhound's plasma blast gun fired from the ground. The discharge consumed a section of the Poxwalker horde and turned the storm white. By the Emperor's will, I stand. Death Guard reached the leg compartments. Melter charges opened the armor. Plague Marines entered through glowing breaches and found Skitarii defenders waiting inside. Radium carbines fired along narrow maintenance passages. Bolter rounds detonated among cybernetic bodies. Mechanical limbs and human organs covered the walls. One Skitarius continued firing after a bolt shell opened his abdomen and scattered his intestines across a ladder well. His augmetic arms obeyed the last command long after his organic heart stopped. The Heralds climbed higher. They killed maintenance thralls and reactor servitors. Plague knives corroded pressure doors. Blight grenades rolled into ammunition galleries. The Princeps continued his battle hymn. Steel is the flesh of duty. His Moderati died around him. Fire is the blood of faith. A Plague Marine entered the command chamber. The Princeps saw him through cracked canopy glass and ordered the reactor unbound. Death is the debt of service. The Warhound detonated. For one instant, Fidelis Rex became a second sun. The blast vaporized the Titan, the boarding heralds, and millions of poxwalkers surrounding it. Skitarii cohorts disappeared. Armored vehicles became molten shadows. The shockwave crossed the plain and struck Wall 6 with enough force to throw men from the battlements. A radioactive crater remained. Its glow pierced the storm. It was visible from orbit. Pell watched the expanding fireball from the bridge of the plague cruiser. You lost millions. Arthric Sevenfold adjusted several counters. They were already spent. And the heralds aboard the engine? Spent more usefully. Pell looked toward Fell. You knew the Princeps would destroy himself. I knew he would choose spectacle over survival. He killed your warriors. He killed hope more efficiently. Upon Morvain,
The surviving warhounds withdrew behind the walls. No one cheered when they returned. Hethron Morn descended into the siege lines on the fourth day. He walked through shell craters, while artillery fell around him. Flies filled the air beneath his hood. His staff struck the mud with every step. The suffering around Calistin had become more than emotion. It had become pressure. Fear, sleeplessness, hunger, and grief pressed against the veil between reality and the warp until that veil thinned. Morn raised his staff. The shell craters opened their eyes. Plague-bearers appeared among the bodies. They did not arrive in flashes of light or storms of sorcery. They were simply present when the smoke shifted, as though they had always stood within the craters. One-eyed demons dragged rusted blades through the mud and counted the dead in droning voices. 109, 110, 111. Nurglings crawled from infected wounds. A wounded guardsman felt movement inside his thigh. The flesh split. 3 small demons pushed through, laughing as they tore themselves free. Others emerged from ammunition crates, water barrels, and the mouths of corpses. Men fired upon them. The creatures burst and spread filth across those nearby. The demons did not behave as a fresh army. They seemed like the siege made visible. Captain Balian Rourke refused to hold fixed positions. He divided his remaining Imperial fists into mobile fortress teams and moved them between collapsing sectors. Thunderhawks carried them where flight remained possible. Elsewhere, they traveled through armored tunnels, maintenance rails, and ammunition lifts. They arrived without speeches. They reinforced. They killed. They withdrew before the walls became graves. At Bastion Cerberus, 4 Imperial fists held a breach, while engineers sealed it with collapsed armor plates. At Battery Mordain, Rourke led a counterattack through plague fog and destroyed a corrupted mortar position inside the wall. At Transit Vault Primus, his brothers restored a defense line after 3 regiments abandoned it. Each appearance kept thousands from breaking. Each cost lives the chapter could not replace. Brother Garant died beneath Wall 6 when a corpse shell burst above him and infected an old wound in his neck. Brother Sifa lost both legs to a buried demon engine and continued firing until the evacuation lift closed. Brother Arden entered a shelter filled with poxwalkers and detonated his remaining grenades after the doors sealed behind him. Rourke recorded each death. Then he moved to the next failing wall. On the 6th day, Cairn Droll stood before Malachor Fell aboard the Sepulchre of Patience. The Plague Champion's armor still bore scars from his failed assault at Wall 8. "You hide behind guns," Droll said. The assembled heralds remained silent. Pell expected violence. Fell rested both hands upon his scythe. "Do I? You call patience a weapon because you fear testing strength." Fell turned toward Othric. "What is the current suicide rate inside Calistin?" The tallyman consulted his records. 7 times the rate recorded before commencement of bombardment. How many military personnel have taken their own lives? 31,604 confirmed. Projected total exceeds 90,000. Fell looked back at Droll. The assault advances. Droll's maul tightened in his grip. No warrior has crossed the wall. Every man who kills himself is a gate opened from within. The guns continued through the 7th day. Then, without warning, they stopped. No final salvo marked the end. One moment the world shook. The next, there was nothing. Guardsmen looked at one another across the trenches. Some struck their helmets, believing the blasts had destroyed their hearing. Artillery crews remained chained to silent guns. Men continued shouting because they had forgotten what ordinary voices sounded like. The silence spread across Morvain. It was so complete that the dripping of blood from the parapets seemed loud. Deep beneath Calistin, an astropath opened his eyes. He had been blind since childhood. Golden light poured from the empty sockets. The message entered him from beyond the plague interference and burned words into the walls of the choir vault. A relief convoy was approaching the system. Not a single vessel. A vast fleet.
transports, warships, soldiers, food, and ammunition. The astropath died smiling. Morvaine's bells began to ring. Across the fortress world, men embraced strangers. Soldiers wept upon the firing steps. Manufacturing workers raised bloodied hands toward shrine icons. Priests declared that the Emperor had heard them. For the first time in weeks, Calistine celebrated. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Malachor Fell listened to the bells. Othric Sevenfold began a new tally. The relief fleet entered the Morvaine system beneath a storm of golden fire. Translation points opened at the system's edge, bright enough to stain the auger lenses of every surviving station. Warp light bled across the void. One vessel emerged, then another, then hundreds more in staggered formation. Navy cruisers came first. Their prows bore the double-headed eagle beneath layers of devotional gold. Frigates and destroyers spread around them, drives burning white. Troopships followed in dense columns, their bellies swollen with armored regiments, infantry divisions, and siege material. Bulk landers carried water condensers, field hospitals, prefabricated bastions, and enough ration stock to feed armies. Transports crowded behind them: grain, ammunition, plasma cells, promethium, medical compounds, replacement respirators. Every necessity Morvaine had begun to believe no longer existed. The relief force was not a phantom conjured by plague sorcery. It was not another corpse procession or false signal stitched together from stolen codes. It was real. Lord General Castor Wren stood beneath the Central Command Vault's hololith and watched salvation take form. Fresh icons multiplied across the outer system. Each bore valid transponder blessings. Each transmitted recognized Navy cipher. Astropathic confirmation reached Calistine through the thinning interference in broken pulses, but the meaning remained unmistakable. A relief force had come. Its commander appeared across every authorized channel. Lord Admiral Danton Hale was a narrow-faced man with a silver augmetic covering one temple. His uniform was immaculate despite the warp translation. Behind him, ratings moved through a bridge lit by tactical displays and shrine lamps. Morvaine Command, this is Lord Admiral Hale aboard the Triumph of St. Drusus. Your distress signal has been received. Your world remains under the protection of the Emperor's navy. A breath passed through the command vault. Wren did not realize he had been holding it until his chest hurt. Hale continued. My fleet carries 17 fresh regimental groups, 3 armored corps, 412 bulk transports, and sufficient supplies to restore your strategic reserves. We will break the enemy cordon and establish orbital superiority. The Admiral leaned toward the transmission lectern. Morvaine will be relieved within 48 hours. For the first time since the gates had closed, men in the command vault cheered. The sound was ragged, exhausted, and almost ashamed of itself. Captain Balian Rourke did not join them. He watched the tactical display. The Imperial Fist's surviving brothers stood behind him, their yellow armor scarred black by the 7-day rain. Empty spaces remained among them. No one occupied those places. No servitor had cleaned the blood from the floor where wounded warriors had once waited for evacuation. Wren turned toward Rourke. You see? I see a fleet. You see the Emperor has not abandoned Morvaine. Rourke's expression remained hard. I see men who have entered an enemy-controlled system. Must every victory offend you? A promise is not a victory. Wren looked again toward the relief fleet and allowed himself for one moment to hate the Space Marine's caution. Across Calistine, hope moved faster than any plague. Manufactorum output increased within an hour of Hale's transmission. Laborers who had collapsed at their stations returned to the shell presses. Men volunteered for double shifts, despite bleeding gums and lungs scarred by chemical shells. Repair crews climbed shattered towers under sporadic bombardment, stringing new Vox cables across gaps where whole districts had fallen. Desertion declined. Soldiers returned to abandoned firing steps.
Some confessed their flight to commissars and asked only to be permitted to serve until relief arrived. Water queues became quieter. Men who had fought over half-filled canisters began sharing them. Shrine processions filled the transit galleries. Priests proclaimed that endurance had been rewarded and that every death had purchased the salvation now crossing the void. Ren addressed the world. His face appeared upon cracked pict screens, manufacturer projectors, and trench displays stained with blood. "Citizens of Morvain," he said, "the Emperor has answered." The words echoed through billions of speakers. Our sacrifices have not been unseen. Our suffering has not been without purpose. A relief fleet approaches under his protection. Hold your posts, maintain your labor, obey your commanders. The enemy has failed. Men wept. Some fell to their knees. Others laughed for the first time in weeks and found they had forgotten how. Commissar Severin Holt postponed 23 executions. The condemned men stood in a shell-scarred assembly hall with their hands bound, waiting beneath the gaze of a bronze Aquila. They had deserted Wall 6 during the final night of the barrage. Days earlier, they would have welcomed death. Now they watched the doors with terror. One prisoner began to sob. "Commissar, please, the fleet is here." Holt studied him. "You abandoned your post. I will return. You left 3 wounded men behind. I was afraid. You remain afraid." "Yes." Holt raised his bolt pistol. The prisoner's legs failed. He collapsed to his knees, shaking. "I do not want to die now." That sentence stopped Holt more effectively than any plea.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Death had become a punishment again. He holstered the pistol. "You will be chained to the forward parapet for 12 hours. Survive, and you return to service." The provost sergeant looked at him. "Commissar, record the sentence." The prisoners were led away. Holt watched them go and understood that the relief fleet had restored more than morale. It had restored the value of life. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Edrin Pell stared at the outer system display. The Imperial fleet filled the hololith. Its strength was undeniable. The Heralds' cordon, spread thin across moons and orbital wreckage, appeared suddenly fragile. He looked toward Malachor Fell. "You miscalculated." No plague marine moved. Othric Sevenfold's counters continued clicking. Fell stood before the strategium, with his scythe resting beside him. "Did I? That fleet can break your ring." "It may. They carry armies." "They do. Then why are you waiting?" The siege lord turned toward Pell. "Hope is not the enemy of despair." Pell frowned. Fell lifted the rusted ration chit from the strategium table. It was the same one he had placed there before the siege began. Men who expect nothing become numb. Hunger becomes routine. Death becomes weather. They cease to feel the shape of what has been taken from them. He set the chit down. Give a starving man bread, and he remembers hunger. The hololith reflected in the cracked lenses of his helm. Give the condemned a road from the gallows, and he learns to fear the rope. Pell looked back toward the relief fleet. You allowed the message through. Hethron Morn stood beyond the strategium, his hood alive with flies. Allowed, the plaguecaster murmured. No, the seed pushed through the soil because it was time to flower, Fell continued. A population denied rescue may endure. A population shown rescue, made to touch it, made to name it salvation. His gauntlet closed slowly around the ration chit, and then denied it will understand despair completely. The plague fleet moved. For weeks, its vessels had remained at widely separated anchorages, guarding routes and striking supply stations. Now engines ignited across the system. Ships emerged from behind moons. Others rose from asteroid shadows and radiation belts. Hulks previously recorded as inert wreckage powered corrupted drives. Captured Imperial vessels drifted into the relief fleet's approach lanes with recognizable hull markings and transponder hymns still intact.
Lord Admiral Hale altered formation. His escorts moved ahead. The relief convoy tightened around the troopships and supply vessels. "Unknown contacts transmitting Imperial recognition," reported his tactical officer. "Challenge them." Challenge returned with valid codes. Fleet identity? Morvain Auxiliary Squadron. Records list them as missing. Hale examined the tactical display. The recovered ships approached slowly, many venting atmosphere and trailing debris. "Order them to hold position." No response. "Repeat." The vessels continued. Hale's hand tightened around the command rail. "Target them." Weapons officers hesitated. "My lord, the recognition codes remain valid." "So do the laws of momentum. Target them." The delay lasted less than a minute. It was enough. Every plague vessel accelerated. The captured ships opened fire first. Lances struck the relief fleet's outer escorts. Torpedoes launched from hulls whose weapon ports had appeared cold. One damaged Imperial cruiser transmitted a final plea for assistance as its prow batteries fired into a troopship at point-blank range. Then, the void filled with war. Torpedo spreads crossed the darkness in numbers too great for the defense turrets to stop. Attack craft launched from carrier decks and met plague interceptors among clouds of wreckage. Lance beams struck void shields until they burst in spheres of blue-white light. The first troopship died with 200,000 soldiers aboard. A torpedo entered its lower hold and detonated beneath the armored vehicle decks. Fuel, ammunition, and compressed atmosphere ignited together. The hull opened across several kilometers. Tanks spun into the void. Lehman Russ battle tanks drifted beside troop carriers, artillery pieces, and cargo containers. Soldiers still strapped inside deployment cages froze before their restraints released. Others were sucked from ruptured compartments alive, mouths opening soundlessly as their bodies crystallized. A second troopship broke in half. Regimental banners, frozen bodies, and crates of Lazarifals spread behind it in a widening cloud. Imperial escorts charged the Heralds. Frigates fired until their magazines emptied. Destroyers drove between the plague vessels and the transports, absorbing torpedoes meant for the convoy. One captain ordered his ship to ramming speed after every weapon battery failed. The frigate struck a Herald cruiser beneath its prow. Both ships vanished inside an eruption of metal and fire. Boarding torpedoes crossed between fleets. Naval armsmen fought in passageways already open to the void. Mag boots held men to decks, while bodies and spent casings floated around them. Plague Marines advanced through venting atmosphere without slowing, their sealed armor carrying them across shattered bulkheads and decompressed hangars. Their bolters fired with discipline. Bridge officers died first, then engine seers, then communications crews. The Heralds did not waste time killing everyone. They seized control. Death Guard boarding parties struck the supply transports in coordinated waves. On the mercy of Hydrofer, armsmen barricaded the bridge behind blast doors. A plague marine cut through the lower access hatch with a plague knife, the corroded blade eating metal as easily as wet flesh. Bolter rounds entered the command deck. The captain died with his hand on the self-destruct rune. A round struck his shoulder and exploded inside his chest, scattering ribs across the navigation altar. The Heralds dragged his corpse aside and took the controls. In the cargo holds below, surviving guardsmen built defenses among ration crates and medical containers. "Hold the line," a sergeant shouted. "They do not take this ship." The first crate moved behind him. Its packaging had swollen. The printed aquila split as fungal growth pushed through the fiberboard. Pale stalks unfolded from grain sacks. Medical packs burst and spilled bandages covered in yellow mold. A soldier near the rear barricade began coughing. Another turned toward him. The coughing man's jaw had unhinged. Black fluid ran from his mouth. He threw himself onto the nearest trooper and bit into the seal beneath the helmet. Gunfire erupted inside the barricade. Hands hammered against the walls. The infected were chewing through maintenance panels from adjacent compartments. Above them, plague spewers flooded the ventilation network. Transport after transport changed course. Their transponders remained Imperial. Their hold still contained millions of living soldiers. Their navigation systems turned toward Morvain. Inside Calistin's command vault, Wren watched the relief convoy approach. At first, the world celebrated. Picked feeds showed Imperial ships descending toward orbital lanes. Priests declared the blockade broken. Civilians crowded observation galleries and pointed toward moving lights in the sky. Then the Navy challenge codes failed. Captain Rourke studied the trajectories. They are not under Imperial control. Wren looked toward the fleet identification stream. Life sign readings remain active. They carry plague. Millions of our men are aboard those ships. They are already weapons. The first transport entered the range of Morvain's defense lasers. Its vox transmitted pleas from multiple decks. Morvain, do not fire. We still hold the cargo levels. Bridge compromised. Emperor's mercy, there are soldiers alive aboard. The transport continued descending. Behind it came hundreds more. Wren stared at the targeting runes. If he permitted them into orbit, they would dock, crash, or release infected landers across the fortress world. If he fired, Morvain would destroy the men sent to save it. The Heralds had placed the choice before him with surgical precision. Rourke's voice was quiet. Give the order. Wren closed his eyes. For a moment, he saw Lord Admiral Hale promising relief within 48 hours. He opened them. All orbital batteries, he said. The approaching fleet is declared hostile. Several officers turned toward him. Lord General, fire! The defense lasers struck first. Golden beams rose from Morvain and cut through the leading transports. Ships came apart in the upper atmosphere. Macro cannon followed, their shells turning troop ships into burning debris fields. The defenders fired upon their rescuers. The sky filled with dying ships. Some exploded in orbit. Others entered the atmosphere intact enough to burn. A bulk lander carrying medical stores struck an ammunition city and erased it beneath a continent-sized fireball. A troop ship crashed across Wall 4, its hull ploughing through defensive districts and leaving hundreds of thousands of infected survivors crawling from the wreck. Fuel carriers became pillars of flame. Supply ships burst and scattered burning grain across the fortress continents like black snow. Billions watched from Calistin. The lights they had named Salvation descended as diseased stars. Shrine bells stopped. Then the riots began. Men tore icons from walls. Civilians attacked priests who had proclaimed deliverance. Soldiers dragged officers from command posts and beat them to death for repeating the promise of relief. At the shrine of the 40 martyrs, a preacher climbed the altar steps. "The Emperor has abandoned Morvain," he shouted. Commissar Holt shot him through the mouth. The bolt round burst the preacher's head across the altar. Before the body fell, hundreds in the crowd repeated the words, "The Emperor has abandoned Morvain." Holt fired again. Another voice took up the cry. Then another. Within moments, the entire shrine was speaking with one voice. "The Emperor has abandoned Morvain." Holt lowered his pistol. There were not enough rounds. Malachor fell transmitted across every surviving Vox channel. First came static, then Lord Admiral Hale's voice. The captured commander attempted to speak through ragged breath. "This is Lord Admiral Danton Hale of His Divine Majesty's Navy. To the defenders of Morvain, hold faith. The enemy has not—" He coughed. The sound became wet. Something moved inside his throat. "The enemy has not broken." Another cough. Hale began to choke. His oath collapsed into sobbing. "Emperor, preserve me." No one interrupted him. "Please." The word passed across every trench, factory, and shelter. "I can feel them inside me." His breathing quickened. "Kill me." Fell allowed the transmission to continue. Hale begged until his voice became bubbling fluid. Then the channel closed. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Arthuric Sevenfold moved one brass counter. "Wall 5, he said, has fallen." Pell looked at Morvain's tactical display. Wall 5's guns remained active. Its void shield still held. Its gates were sealed. Fell watched fires spread across the fortress world. The wall was standing. No one behind it believed in rescue anymore. The first ration block containing a human tooth was issued in Habitation Vault Gethsemane. The recipient was a shell loader named Brannick Tay. He broke the grey slab across his knee and found the tooth embedded near its center, an adult molar with a blackened root. A length of copper identification wire protruded beside it. Tay stared at the ration. The distribution clerk behind the armored grill stared back. Move on. There is a tooth in it. Protein matter has not been fully rendered. Tay held the broken block toward the grill. There is a thrown-down tooth in it. The clerk pressed one finger against the activation stud beneath his desk. 2 planetary defense troopers stepped closer with laser guns raised. Consumption is mandatory under the first ration decree, the clerk said. Waste is theft from the Emperor. Tay looked at the thousands waiting behind him. Their eyes rested upon the ration in his hand. Some watched with disgust. Most watched with hunger. He pulled out the tooth. Then he ate the block. Food distribution had not failed with a single announcement. It had failed through amendments, emergency calculations, and seals of authority stamped upon documents describing stores that no longer existed. The falling relief ships had destroyed 7 of Calistin's principal reserve districts. Grain silos had burned. Nutrient paste reservoirs had ruptured into sewage channels. A bulk lander carrying preserved protein struck a manufactorum and atomized enough food to sustain several million soldiers for months. Administratum officials continued issuing reassuring totals until Lord General Castor Wren ordered them brought before the Central Command Vault. Prefect Militant Albus Crane stood beneath the hololith with his hands folded inside his robes. The surviving reserves remained sufficient for 103 days. Magos Dominus Hecaton 9 emitted a burst of Binharic contempt. Wren looked at Crane. The last report claimed 150. Revisions were required after confirmation of storage losses. How many reserves physically remain? Crane hesitated. Colonel Hadron Malk stood near the chamber doors, mud still dried across his armor. Captain Balian Rourke watched from beside the tactical display. Commissar Severin Holt rested one gloved hand upon the holster of his bolt pistol. Wren repeated the question. How much food remains? Crane's face had gone pale. Less than 20 days at present allocation. Silence filled the vault. Wren stared at him. You signed the public projection. The public projection was intended to preserve order. You told me the stores existed. I reported confirmed manifests. Manifests do not feed men. Crane's gaze moved toward Holt. The commissar did not draw his weapon. That frightened the prefect more. Corpse starch production was tripled. Rendering vats operated without pause. The dead arrived faster than reclamation crews could strip them of uniforms, augmetics, and identification implants. Bodies entered the grinders intact. Diseased flesh mixed with the remains of soldiers killed by bombardment, civilians shot in water riots, and plague victims whose tissues had already begun to change. The purification rites failed. Some ration blocks contained hair woven through the compressed protein like wire. Others held finger bones, fragments of jaw, or devotional medals, softened by industrial acids, but not fully dissolved. Identification implants survived the rendering process and blinked weakly from inside the food. In one barracks, a guardsman found his brother's regimental tag within his ration. He recognized the service number. He ate around it. In the underhive, flesh became currency. The first cannibal market appeared beneath a collapsed transit basilica. Gangs hung lanterns above tables made from hab doors and sold meat wrapped in stained parchment. Prices varied according to age, fat content, and visible infection. Infant flesh commanded the highest value. Soldiers brought ammunition. Laborers brought machine parts. Priests brought relics and absolution. Men with nothing else brought relatives. The sellers learned to preserve their stock alive.
Arbitrators raided the market after a confession extracted from a captured gang runner. They entered beneath suppression shields and fired execution rounds into anyone who resisted. Behind the butcher stalls, they found the slaughter rooms. Hooks hung from ceiling rails. Living victims were suspended by wrists and ankles, fed enough water to delay death. Strips of flesh had been removed from thighs, buttocks, and backs, then sealed with cauterizing irons. Some had survived several harvests. Their mouths had been sewn shut to prevent screaming from attracting patrols. One arbitrator removed his helmet and vomited. His proctor shot him for breaking formation. The gang leaders were dragged into the public square and burned alive beneath picked recorders. Ecclesiarchy speakers proclaimed that the Emperor's justice had cleansed Callistin of abomination. After the crowd dispersed, Munitorum officers entered the slaughter rooms. They inventoried the surviving meat. They requisitioned all of it. The first open battle between Imperial formations began at Depot Orison. The 88th Morvanian trench rifles arrived to collect their authorized ration issue and found the gates sealed by planetary defense troops. Colonel Malk demanded entry. A PDF major answered from the battlements. The depot is reserved for Wall 4 garrisons. My regiment holds Wall 6. Your authorization code has been superseded. By whose authority? The major did not answer. Malk looked at the gun positions above the gate. Heavy stubbers had been turned inward. Autocannon covered the approach. The defenders had stacked ammunition crates behind the wall. His own soldiers watched him from the transport columns. They had not eaten in 2 days. Malk opened a command channel. Major, you have 1 minute to open the depot. We are both servants of the throne. Then obey. We preserve these supplies for the defense. So do I. The minute expired. Malk ordered the gate destroyed. A demolisher fired from less than 100 meters. The shell struck the center of the depot doors and blew them inward. PDF troops opened fire from the battlements. Guardsmen died in the approach road, bodies thrown against armored transports. The trench rifles stormed the depot. They fought beneath Imperial banners. They shouted the same battle prayers. They killed one another for ration crates marked with the double-headed eagle. Similar battles spread across Callistin. Guard regiments seized civilian granaries. Planetary defense battalions barricaded water condensers. Skitari cohorts sealed the approaches to Mechanicus districts and fired radium weapons into crowds that came begging for water. The dead lay around condenser towers in concentric rings. Each ring marked the distance at which the Skitari had issued their final warning. Ren's command network became a map of isolated kingdoms. Each commander claimed loyalty to Morvain. Each refused orders that threatened his own supplies. Every fortress within the fortress began defending itself from its supposed allies. Commissar Holt attempted to restore central authority. He executed 3 generals for withholding ammunition. He executed 14 colonels for falsifying ration accounts. He executed quartermasters in numbers great enough that their replacements no longer knew which depots they controlled. At Arsenal District Septimus, Holt shot a major whose regiment had guarded 6,000 ration blocks while nearby units starved. At Barracks Mordain, he hanged an entire supply staff from a loading gantry and left their bodies above the distribution lines. At Command Post Helicon, he forced 2 rival officers to watch their personal stores fed into public grinders before killing them both. The executions changed nothing. Every death created another vacancy. Every vacancy required paperwork. Every order passed through Vox lines corrupted by plague code, through relay stations abandoned under bombardment, through clerks who distrusted the seal upon the message, and officers who assumed every command was an attempt to steal what remained. Holt stood inside a Munitorum archive surrounded by dead scribes. Slates covered the floor. Orders continued printing from cogitator mouths, even though no living official remained to process them. One document required the transfer of ammunition from a depot destroyed 3 weeks earlier. Another reassigned a regiment whose soldiers were all dead.
A third ordered an executed colonel to report upon the disciplinary failures that had justified his death. Holt picked up the final order. The paper trembled in his hand. The Heralds had not merely poisoned water or corrupted machines, they had weaponized obedience. The Imperium's vast machinery of seals, ranks, permissions and punishments had become a labyrinth in which every man could justify refusing every other. Hecaton 9 withdrew the Mechanicus forces without requesting permission. Skitarii cohorts abandoned 3 civilian defense sectors and fell back toward the Manufactorum district. Cataphron battle servitors sealed the transit arteries behind them. Bulkhead gates descended. New spheric barriers rose across the machine network. The Magos transmitted his declaration to Central Command. Preservation of sacred industrial assets now supersedes defense of non-essential biological population zones. Wren listened without speaking. Rourke stepped toward the Vox altar. You are abandoning the eastern hives. Affirmative. 700 million civilians remain there. Civilian survival contributes less to continued resistance than preservation of shell production. Their labor operates those presses. Replacement organic labor remains available. Rourke's face hardened. You will reopen the gates. Negative. I will break them. Hecaton 9's reply arrived after a brief burst of Binharic exchange. Such action will be classified as hostile interference with the Omnissire's domain. Rourke looked toward Wren. Give me the order. Wren saw the choice before him. If he supported Rourke, the Imperial fists would attack the Mechanicus, while the Heralds waited beyond the walls. If he supported Hecaton 9, hundreds of millions would be abandoned. He looked at the tactical display and saw Imperial icons turning toward one another. No attack, he said. Rourke's scarred face remained expressionless. You have surrendered those districts. I have prevented civil war. From beyond the vault walls came the distant thunder of Imperial tanks firing upon Imperial positions. Rourke said nothing. The Heralds sent no demand for surrender. That absence began to torment Wren more than any threat. He waited for the Vox summons. He imagined Fell's voice offering terms, promising survival to those who opened the gates, or service to those who renounced the Emperor. Nothing came. No herald approached beneath a banner. No ultimatum appeared upon the command channels. The silence meant there could be no negotiation. The heralds did not distinguish between resistance and submission. Men behind the walls could fight, kneel, pray, riot, or beg. Every choice ended in the same grave. Wren began sleeping in the command vault because he feared leaving the Vox altar unattended. He would wake at imagined signals. Each time, there was only static. The plague cult rose openly. It did not rise under one leader. It possessed no central command and sought no throne. Workers who had hidden blackened gums and swelling sores for weeks abandoned their posts. They opened armories. They severed pumps. They rang factory bells in sequences that no Imperial catechism recognized. The bells answered one another across Calistin. 7 slow tolls, 3 rapid, 7 slow. Men began carving the 3 joined circles into their flesh. Some used knives. Others pressed heated machine stamps against their chests until fat hissed and skin burned away. At Manufactorum Vesper, infected laborers unlocked a weapons store and handed lasguns to poxwalkers. At Pump Shrine Calthus, technicians reversed purification flows and filled loyal districts with sewage. At Foundry Orison, workers gathered around a molten metal channel and sang until shapes began moving beneath the surface. Plague bearers stepped from cooling vats. Nurglings crawled through bell housings. The cultists did not attempt to seize government. They had ceased believing government existed. Calistin entered civil war. Loyal guard units fought plague cults through Manufactorum Isles. Starving civilians attacked both sides. Isolated Imperial formations defended private supply depots against anyone who approached. A Lehman Russ squadron fired down the Avenue of Saints after refugees blocked its advance. Battle cannon shells passed through the crowd and burst among hab towers. Bodies covered the road in layers. The tanks continued forward, tracks grinding men into the stone until blood filled the drainage channels. Artillery batteries intended for the outer siege received coordinates inside Calistin. Earthshaker rounds fell upon districts still bearing imperial banners. One shell destroyed a shrine sheltering 40,000 civilians. Another struck a PDF armory and scattered unexploded munitions across 3 habitation tiers. The fortress consumed itself street by street. The uprising reached the central command vault during the 9th ration bell. It began with an explosion in the eastern access gallery. Blast doors buckled inward. Smoke rolled across the strategium. Men in officers' uniforms came through the breach. Some wore general staff insignia. Others were command guards. All carried weapons. Wren stared at them. General Marius Pellin raised a las pistol. "You have murdered Morvain," he said. Malk drew his own weapon. Pellin fired first. The shot struck Wren beneath the ribs. His body armor absorbed part of the beam, but burned flesh filled the chamber with a sharp, fatty stink. Malk shot Pellin through the throat. Gunfire erupted. Command guards fired at one another across the hololithic display. Tactical projections flickered as bodies fell through them. A colonel charged Wren with a ceremonial saber. Malk caught the blade on his forearm plate and drove a combat knife beneath the man's jaw. The point entered the brain. Malk twisted and pulled free. Wren lay behind the command throne, one hand pressed against his wound. Malk dragged him toward cover. "Why?" Wren gasped. "Evacuation," Pellin gurgled from the floor. Blood poured from his ruined throat. Malk found the access slate inside the general's coat. It contained routes unknown to Central Command. Armored tunnels ran from the command vault to subterranean mag rail lines. Hidden transports waited beneath the western citadel. There were enough places for senior officers, administratum prefects, ecclesiarchy dignitaries, and mechanicus envoys. Not for soldiers, not for civilians. Wren read the slate, while medici servitors sealed his wound. How long has this existed? Malk looked at the dead commanders. Long enough. Wren's face tightened with pain. Destroy the routes. Malk hesitated. They may be the final means of organized withdrawal. For whom? The command staff. Wren looked toward the bodies in the chamber. They chose themselves. Once destroyed, no one leaves the citadel. No one was leaving Morvain. Malk met his eyes. The Lord General's earlier lies, his ration decrees, and his orders to burn infected districts remained between them. None could be undone. Collapse every tunnel, Wren said. Destroy the transports. Seal the rails. Malk transmitted the command. Demolition charges detonated beneath the western citadel. The hidden routes folded under millions of tons of stone. The ruling class of Morvain was trapped with everyone it had intended to abandon. It was not redemption. It was merely the first honest order Wren had given in weeks. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Othric Sevenfold approached the strategium. Malachor Fell watched Calistin's internal fires stain the night side of the world. The first true wall has fallen, Othric said. Fell turned. Which defensive belt? None. The Tallyman's brass counters clicked. Their soldiers no longer believe the men beside them are allies. Silence followed. Then Fell lifted his scythe from the strategium floor. Across the plague fleet, warning bells began to toll. In the siege lines, plague marines checked bolter magazines. Plague-burst crawlers raised their mortars. Demon engines stirred inside pits of filth and bone. The masonry remained strong. The void shield still burned. The guns still possessed ammunition. But unity was dead. Prepare the assault, Fell said. The gap appeared 3 hours before false dawn. For 27 days, the Heralds of Despair had enclosed Calistin within overlapping trenches, artillery parks, plague pits, and fields of corrupted dead. Their siege ring had shown no weakness. Every road lay under observation. Every approach had been mined. Every ruin concealed guns, cultists, or worse. Then, an entire section of the western line emptied. Reconnaissance servitors detected abandoned redoubts stretching from Wall 4 to the Plague Artillery hinterland. No engines moved behind them. No heat signatures marked the bunkers. Auspex sweeps found only dead cultists, ruined supply carts, and half-flooded trenches. At the far end of the corridor stood the rusted towers of an artillery command center. Lord General Castor Wren studied the tactical projection from a Medici throne. Armor plates covered the wound beneath his ribs. Tubes fed pain suppressants into his bloodstream, yet each breath still dragged fire through his side. Colonel Hadron Malk stood beside him. Captain Balian Rourke watched the western corridor revolve above the strategium. "It is offered," Rourke said. Wren's face tightened. "You believe it a trap?" "Yes. Yet you advised the sortie. Remaining behind the walls guarantees extinction." Malk looked at the Imperial fist. "You intend to walk into a trap because the alternative is waiting for another?" "I intend to learn its shape before it closes." The command vault shook beneath distant shelling. Dust fell from the names carved into the ceiling. Wren considered the forces still available to Morvain. Armored regiments had been reduced by plague mines and civil war, but hundreds of tanks remained. Infantry filled every defense belt. Mechanicus cohorts had withdrawn to their enclaves, yet Hecaton 9 had agreed to contribute combat servitors and Skitarii in exchange for recovery rights over captured demon engines. The fortress still possessed armies large enough to drown nations. It lacked time. Wren leaned forward, despite the pain. "We strike through 3 gates. The central column drives for the artillery command center. Northern and southern forces widen the corridor and prevent encirclement." Rourke said nothing. "You disagree?" "The encirclement has already been planned." "Then we break it." Wren looked toward Malk. "You will command the central infantry." Malk nodded once. "Captain Rourke, take the spearhead." The Imperial fist lowered his head. "The order is received." The gates opened beneath the greatest barrage Morvain had yet fired. Every surviving battery answered the command. Earthshaker cannon roared from fortress emplacements. Manticore rockets crossed the sky in screaming waves. Macro shells descended beyond the walls and lifted curtains of black soil, corpses, and shattered metal. Wall 4's western gate rose. Wall 5 opened to the north. Wall 6 released the southern force. The armies of Morvain poured out. 500 tanks spearheaded the central advance. Lehman Russ battle tanks formed the armored mass, their cannon elevated above hulls painted with kill markings, saints' names, and desperate prayers. Demolishers moved among them, short siege guns aimed toward the nearest bunkers. Hellhounds followed behind infantry screens, Prometheum tanks rattling beneath layers of added armor. Super heavy engines came next. Baneblades shook the road beneath their tracks. Shadow swords carried volcano cannon intended for titans and fortress walls. Armored carriers moved between them, packed with soldiers who had spent weeks behind stone, waiting for the chance to kill an enemy they could see. Trench infantry followed in numbers that transformed roads into moving rivers of helmets and rifles. Skitarii marched in precise blocks, red robes darkened by ash. Combat servitors advanced without sound, heavy weapons built into their limbs. Labor levies carried ammunition, fuel and water beneath the lashes of overseers. The remaining Imperial fists rode at the center aboard assault transports and Thunderhawks. Aircraft crossed overhead. Many lacked enough fuel to return. Their pilots knew it. They flew anyway. Bombers descended through anti-air fire and released their payloads at such low altitude that some vanished in their own detonations. Lightning fighters rammed plague drones after expending ammunition. Valkyries delivered stormtroops beyond the first trench line, then turned to attack demon engines with door guns until corrupted fire tore them from the sky. The first Imperial wave struck the abandoned corridor.
Nothing opposed it. Tanks crushed through empty cultist trenches. Infantry crossed barricades without drawing fire. Forward scouts reached the second defensive line and found weapons abandoned beside cooling emplacements. Then the Heralds appeared. Plague Marines rose from shell holes and bunker ruins, firing bolters into the advancing ranks. Blight launchers arced diseased projectiles over armor. Poxwalkers spilled from covered pits. The Imperial answer was immediate. Battle cannon shells struck the green-armored warriors and tore them into wet fragments. Demolishers fired at close range, obliterating bunkers along with everything inside them. Lascannon beams burned through myphitic blight haulers attempting to cross the road. Massed las fire filled the air. Poxwalkers fell by the tens of thousands. Infantry advanced over them before they could rise. Hellhounds washed the trenches in Prometheum. The dead burned in heaps while guardsmen pushed. Deeper into the corridor, bayonets cutting down anything that moved. The heralds withdrew. At first, the Imperial soldiers did not believe what they were seeing. Plague Marines yielded the first line, then the second. They dragged wounded brothers from the field and fired disciplined volleys while retreating. Demon engines fell back beneath smoke. Poxwalker hordes remained behind to slow pursuit and were pulverized beneath tracks. A voice rose from the infantry columns. "They are breaking." Another repeated it. Then thousands. "They are breaking." Men who had watched walls turn against them and rescuers burn in the sky saw the Death Guard retreating before Imperial steel. The impossible became visible. The heralds could be driven back. Malk stood in the command cupola of a moving Baneblade and listened to the cheers spread across the Vox. He saw no rout. The Death Guard never turned their backs. They yielded one position at a time. Every trench had been marked with corroded stakes. Every road contained abandoned bodies arranged at measured intervals. Range markers. "Slow the advance," Malk ordered. A major answered from the leading armor. "We have them, Colonel." "You have empty ground. Reduce speed." "The infantry cannot match us if we halt." "That is precisely why you will halt." The major ignored him. Malk watched the forward tanks accelerate. Victory had made them deaf. The central armored force outpaced its fuel carriers. Infantry formations broke apart, trying to keep up. Field medici units fell kilometers behind, treating men wounded by mines, spores, and the lingering dead. The corridor widened. The Imperial army became longer, thinner, and hungrier with every kilometer. Aboard the Sepulchre of Patience, Malachor Fell watched it happen. Edron Pell stood beside the Strategium, following the Imperial icons as they advanced toward the apparent artillery center. "You are giving them the guns." "Am I?" "They have crossed half your western line. They have crossed the distance between their supplies and their courage." Othric Sevenfold moved counters across his brass abacus. "Forward armor exceeds supporting infantry by 8 kilometers. Click. Fuel columns delayed by road congestion. Click. Field medici capacity exceeded. Click. Command cohesion degrading under perceived victory." Fell rested one gauntlet upon his scythe. "Let them run." Captain Rourke reached the artillery command center with 7 Imperial fists. The structure rose from a field of abandoned redoubts, a low fortress of rusted armor and bone-white stone. No guns fired from its towers. No defenders manned the walls. Rourke studied the entrances. "Brother Joran." The Imperial fist stepped forward with a melter charge. "Set breach." The charge burned through the main gate. Molten metal ran down its surface. Rourke struck the weakened section with his power fist and sent it crashing inward. The Imperial fists entered. Rows of cogitators filled the central chamber. Each machine was connected to a human head. The heads had been severed at the neck and preserved inside brass cradles. Cables entered eye sockets, mouths, and exposed spinal columns. Some murmured firing coordinates. Others repeated prayers in voices dried to whispers. No artillery officers waited. No targeting crews. No command staff. Rourke approached the central console. Its screens displayed empty gun positions. Brother Joran opened a secondary passage and found rails descending beneath the facility. The tracks were fresh. "Subterranean transport," he said. Rourke followed them with his gaze. The Heralds had moved the guns, not hours earlier, days. The entire command center had been left as bait before the gap appeared. Rourke activated the command channel. "All formations, halt advance, prepare immediate withdrawal." Static swallowed the reply. Then the horizon behind him erupted. The true artillery positions opened fire from concealed galleries north and south of the corridor. Their first targets were the gates. Plague-burst mortars fired in overlapping sequence. Orbital shells descended upon Wall 4's western portal. Concealed macro cannons struck the road approaches. Fortifications collapsed around the open gates, burying entrances beneath mountains of ferrocrete and bodies. The second salvo struck the supply columns. Fuel tankers erupted. Promethium rolled across the roads in burning rivers. Ammunition carriers detonated one after another. Shells cooked inside transports and burst through armor, cutting down infantry packed along the route. Water convoys vanished beneath chemical strikes. Spore clouds spread across the rear formations. The Imperial army outside Calistin became a fortress of flesh. It possessed no walls, no roofs, no clean water, no fixed guns, only enemies on every horizon. Cairn Droll began the counterattack. The Plague Champion emerged from the northern smoke with his corrupted maul in one hand. His armor had swollen around old battle damage. Rusted chains hung from his pauldrons, threaded with jawbones taken from men killed during the assault on Wall 8. The Heralds advanced around him. Plague Marines closed from both flanks. Demon engines bounded through shell craters. Fetid bloat drones descended upon infantry columns, spraying plague fluids that stripped skin from faces and filled lungs with burning rot. Poxwalkers came behind, not tens of thousands, millions. They poured from trenches, tunnels, and corpse pits, surrounding the Imperial columns in a moving wall of dead flesh. Droll opened fire at close range. His bolter killed a tank commander in the cupola, bursting the man's torso across the turret. The Plague Champion mounted the vehicle before the corpse fell. "Now," Droll growled across the Herald's vox. "Now we teach the wall to bleed." His warriors entered the armor formations. Plague knives cut through hatch seals. Flails smashed tracks and suspension housings. Great cleavers struck vision slits, turret rings, and engine decks. A herald climbed onto a Lehman Russ and tore away the commander's hatch. The crew fired pistols upward. Bolt rounds answered. The gunner's head burst against the breach. The loader lost one arm and continued screaming as a Plague Marine poured diseased slurry into the opening. The hatch slammed shut. Inside, the fluid rose. It entered boots, respirators, and wounds. Men kicked at escape locks, while their armor filled with filth. Their final transmissions became choking static. Another tank stopped when fibrous growth packed its engine vents. Its crew remained sealed inside as oxygen failed. They fired until the ammunition was gone, then beat upon the hatches while poxwalkers crowded across the hull. Guardsmen fought around the immobilized armor. Lass fire burned holes through diseased flesh. Bayonets entered swollen bodies and became trapped. Poxwalkers dragged soldiers down and bit through flak armor. Men disappeared beneath the horde, their screams ending only when throats were pulled open. Malk's Baneblade turned across the road and fired every weapon. The main cannon destroyed a demon engine at less than 200 meters. Heavy bolters cut through poxwalkers. Lascannon fire struck a Plague Marine and burned him in half. The upper body continued crawling. "Withdrawal lanes are blocked," reported a Vox officer. "Reopen them." "By what route?" Malk looked toward Calistin. The gates were buried beneath fire. Captain Rourke found Cairn Droll beside the ruins of a shadow sword. The super-heavy tank had been opened from above. Its crew lay across the hull, bodies pulled through narrow hatches until shoulders, hips, and skulls had broken. Droll stood among them, maul coated in blood and oil. Rourke advanced with his storm shield raised. Droll turned. You came out of your grave, little wall builder. Rourke said nothing. Droll charged. The maul struck the storm shield. The impact drove Rourke backward through a dead guardsman and into the side of the ruined tank. His shield's field flashed. Cracks spread across its surface. Droll swung again. Rourke caught the blow at an angle. The maul slid from the shield and smashed armor from his left pauldron. Rourke drove his power fist into Droll's abdomen. The energy field burst through bloated plate. Diseased organs spilled around the gauntlet, hot and writhing. Droll laughed. He brought his helmet forward and struck Rourke's face. Bone cracked. Rourke staggered. Droll raised the maul overhead. The Imperial fist rammed his storm shield into the Plague Champion's elbow and trapped the arm against the Shadow Sword's hull. His power fist closed around the joint. He crushed it. Armor folded. Bone splintered. The maul fell with Droll severed. Hand still gripping the haft. Droll struck with his remaining fist. Rourke absorbed the blow, stepped inside the Plague Marine's reach, and drove his power fist upward beneath the jaw. Droll's skull collapsed. His helm split. Teeth, fragments of bone and black fluid burst from the faceplate. The Plague Champion fell to one knee. He continued laughing. The sound came through a ruined jaw as a wet, broken rattle. Rourke struck him again. The head flattened against the armor collar. Still, the laughter continued. Brother Joran stepped forward and emptied his bolt magazine into Droll's torso. Explosive rounds tore the champion apart from chest to pelvis. Armor opened. Organs became shredded filth. The body toppled backward across the dead tank crew. For one heartbeat, the heralds around them paused. Then another Plague Champion raised his cleaver. Forward. That was all. No challenge, no vow of vengeance, no howl for their fallen commander. The Death Guard resumed their advance. Rourke looked at Droll's remains and understood. The heralds were not held together by the glory of champions. They did not fight because one warrior commanded louder than another. They advanced because advance had become their nature. Killing Droll had removed a name. It had not removed inevitability. The Imperial army began retreating. Millions turned toward Calistin. Tanks crushed infantry in their haste to reach the gates. Wounded men were left beneath abandoned vehicles. Officers tried to form columns and were swept away by the mass. At Wall 4, defenders watched the horde of survivors approach through plague fog. Auspex registered infection across entire regiments. Gate crews refused to open. The Vox filled with pleas. We are loyal. We hold valid codes. Open the gate. They are behind us. Wren heard every transmission from the command vault. Rourke's voice broke through the static. Open Wall 4. Establish decontamination corridors inside the secondary galleries. Hecaton 9 answered from the Mechanicus Enclave. Contamination probability exceeds acceptable threshold. Malk shouted over explosions. There is no acceptable threshold. Open the damned gate. Wren looked toward the plague readings. Millions of troops pressed against the walls. Among them moved infected soldiers, poxwalkers, and concealed cultists. Opening the gate might save the army. It might also finish Calistin. Delay, Wren ordered. Prepare internal quarantine. Rourke's reply was immediate. There is no time. Wren waited. That hesitation killed more men than any order. The outer formations reached the wall and found the gates closed. Millions compressed against adamantine, while the plague lines advanced behind them. Fortress guns fired over their heads, but shells fell among friend and enemy alike. Poxwalkers entered the trapped mass. Plague Marines followed. Men clawed at their own walls. Some climbed upon mountains of bodies to reach firing apertures. Defenders above refused ladders, fearing infection. Soldiers shot one another for space near the sealed doors. Malk watched a regiment disappear between the fortress and the dead. On the bridge of the Sepulchre of Patience, Othric Sevenfold recorded the destruction. Pell stared at the world below. They are killing their own. Fell watched the fortress guns fire into the mass. No, he said, hope is killing them. Othric's quill moved across the ledger. "The moment hope murdered its own children," he recorded. Outside Wall 4, the Imperial army died with its hands against the gate. The Heralds of Despair began their first general advance beneath a sky without color. Poisonous fog lay across the dead plains before Calastin, thick enough to hide the horizon and low enough to crawl through the trenches like a living thing. It carried the stench of burned grain, ruptured corpses, and the metallic bitterness of plague compounds. Artillery flashes moved within it, distant and intermittent, as though lightning had become trapped beneath the earth. Then the bells began. They rang from demon engines, from plague shrines mounted upon tracked carriers, and from iron frames dragged through the mud by gangs of chained slaves. No two bells sounded alike. Some gave deep cathedral tolls. Others screamed through cracks in their metal. Smaller bells whispered like loose teeth inside. Skulls. Bright green shapes emerged through the fog. The heralds came in ranks. Their armor had once been the color of fresh leaves. War, corrosion, and mutation had transformed it into every shade of rot. Pale copper-trimmed breastplates swollen around diseased flesh. Modified marks of Nurgle hung from chains or had been cut directly into ceramite. Ancient Mark III plates stood beside newer armor stripped from dead loyalists and reshaped by infection until differences of age meant nothing. They advanced without haste. No champion raised a blade and shouted a war cry. No legionary called upon the gods. Armor vox clicked. Corroded respirators rasped. Boots struck mud with wet, measured impacts. Behind every step lay certainty. Colonel Hadron Malk watched from the ruins of Wall 4. The defense belt no longer resembled a wall. Weeks of bombardment had broken its bastions into islands of armor and ferrocrete, separated by breaches kilometers wide. Gun towers lay on their sides. Trenches had collapsed into one another. Ammunition galleries opened directly onto the battlefield, their interiors lit by burning propellant. What remained of the 88th Morvanian trench rifles held those ruins. Malk stood inside a shattered observation chamber with one magnocular lens pressed to his eye. The other half of the instrument had been torn away by shrapnel. Through the surviving lens, he saw the plague army approach. Poxwalkers came first. They filled the plains from one edge of sight to the other. Millions of dead men and dying men stumbled through the fog in layered masses. Some wore uniforms taken from the army destroyed outside the gates. Others still carried the tools of hab laborers, corpse grinders, and shell press operators. Their wounds remained open, their entrails dragged through the mud. Flies nested in empty eyes. Cultists moved among them. They dragged plague cauldrons on iron wheels. They hauled ammunition carts loaded with bloated shells. Some had replaced arms with hooks or blades. Others carried poles from which hung the bodies of Imperial officers, their mouths sewn open around rusted bells. Plague-bearers marched through the horde, one-eyed faces set in expressions of eternal misery. They counted as they came. 109,812. A demon's voice rolled across the field. 109,813. Another took up the count. 109,814. Nurglings swarmed through shell holes ahead of them. The small demons crawled over the wounded left from the failed sortie, chewing fingers, lips, and eyelids. One opened a guardsman's belly and climbed inside while the man remained alive enough to scream. Malk lowered the magnocular. Range? 8 kilometers and closing, replied the artillery officer. Fire! Wall 4 answered. Macro cannon beneath the surviving bastions discharged with force that shook dust from the buried levels of Calastin. Shells crossed the field and struck the approaching horde. Whole valleys appeared where bodies had stood. Mud, limbs, and diseased vapor rose in columns hundreds of meters high. Basilisk batteries fired from behind the wall. The guns recoiled until their stabilizers tore trenches through the ground.
Crews loaded again before the breaches had cooled. Some barrels glowed, others split lengthwise after hours of continuous use, killing their own crews in eruptions of metal. Laser guns joined the barrage. Millions of red beams crossed the darkness. The night became a crimson haze. Poxwalkers burned by the tens of thousands. Bodies collapsed in rows. Artillery annihilated entire cultist formations. Plague bearers vanished beneath macro shell impacts and returned from the smoke still counting. The mass continued. Fresh dead rose behind the Imperial firing lines. Soldiers killed by plague or starvation dragged themselves from trench sumps. Corpses in medici shelters opened their eyes. Men who had been shot during ration riots climbed from disposal pits and attacked the crews trying to bring ammunition forward. The enemy advanced from both sides of the guns. Malk heard screaming through the lower Vox channels. Rear trench infection. Poxwalkers inside battery Calthas. Medici station breached. Seal the galleries, Malk ordered. Burn every corpse, living or dead if it rises. Shoot it, a captain answered through static. Colonel, there are wounded in those shelters. There are weapons in your hands. The captain did not reply. Malk closed the channel. Beyond the walls, the plague-burst crawlers began firing. Their mortars hurled shells high over the forward defences. The rounds descended behind Wall 4, striking ammunition lifts, command galleries, and reserve formations. One projectile burst inside a troop shelter and filled the chamber with infected metal fragments. Men survived the initial detonation, only to begin coughing pieces of lung into their respirators. Entropy weapons fired from the crawlers' hulls. Dark beams struck Imperial armor and aged it in moments. Tank plating cracked, welds failed, tracks collapsed into rust. Crews watched their vehicles decay around them before blight launcher rounds entered vision ports and burst within the hulls. Myphitic blight haulers moved ahead of the crawlers in bounding packs. They screened the artillery with smoke, diseased vapor, and their own swollen bodies. Lascannon beams tore several apart. Others reached the defensive hardpoints and fired multi-melters into bunker mouths. Fetid bloat drones passed above the trenches. Their rotors chopped through smoke and human remains. Plague spewers flooded firing positions with corrosive filth. Flesh softened. Flak armor dissolved. Men became steaming shapes that continued screaming after their faces had melted into their chests. Some drones carried flesh mowers. The rotating blades entered packed infantry lines and emerged draped in organs. The first breach opened at Bastion Mordain. A macro shell had already cracked the outer gate. Repeated plague mortar impacts widened the fracture until whole slabs of ferrocrete collapsed into the trench behind it. Poxwalkers poured through. Heavy bolters cut them apart. More climbed over the bodies. Then the Heralds entered. Plague Marines crossed the breach beneath disciplined covering fire. Their bolters struck defenders in the chest, throat, and pelvis. Explosive rounds entered bodies and detonated within armor, throwing blood and bone through the firing galleries. Blight launchers fired into enclosed rooms. The projectiles burst against walls and filled chambers with infected shrapnel. Men staggered from the smoke with metal fragments moving beneath their skin. Others collapsed while growth swelled inside their mouths and pushed teeth outward. Plague spewers washed over gun crews. A firing team vanished beneath a stream of diseased liquid. When it passed, only weapons, boots, and steaming organic residue remained. Great plague cleavers followed. The heralds who carried them did not fight with grace. They swung with the force of industrial execution machines. One blade entered a guardsman at the shoulder and left beneath the opposite hip. Another removed 3 men at the waist in a single blow. Limbs and torsos fell into the trench water and floated among spent charge packs. Malk reached the breach with his command squad. First Company, hold the western gallery. Second Company, reinforce the ammunition tunnel. No retreat beyond the inner gun line. A sergeant beside him checked his las rifle. Charge pack is dry. Take one from the dead. The sergeant looked down. Bodies covered the floor. He pulled a pack from a fallen trooper's webbing,
wiped blood from the contacts, and slammed it into place. The fighting compressed into corridors barely wide enough for 2 men abreast. Laser guns fired until charge packs overheated. Bolters answered. Grenades detonated against ceilings, bringing down stone and steel upon both sides. When the ammunition ran out, the trench rifles fixed bayonets. Men stabbed at gaps in corrupted armor. Blades snapped. Entrenching tools became axes. Soldiers lifted broken masonry and smashed it against helms. One veteran drove a sharpened length of reinforcing bar through a plague marine's eye lens and held it there while the legionary cut him open from groin to throat. Blood filled the lowest trench. It rose around boots. The drainage pumps had failed. Every corpse added to the level. Men slipped, fell, and disappeared beneath the red-black surface. Malk saw one veteran take a bolter round through the chest and fall backward into the trench lake. His hands remained above the surface for several seconds before another wave of blood closed over them. A wounded guardsman tried to stand. His legs were gone beneath the knees. He slipped beneath the blood and drowned among the bodies of his own regiment. Commissar Severin Holt reached Wall 4 at the head of a reserve battalion. His authority had returned. The soldiers saw an enemy before them, not another starving regiment or a quartermaster guarding food. Familiar commands possessed meaning again. Hold, fire, advance, die where ordered. Holt stood upon a collapsed parapet, with one side of his greatcoat burned away. "Forward ranks kneel," he shouted. "Rear ranks fire over them, by files. Do not waste charge." The battalion obeyed. Las fire struck the breach in measured volleys. A plague marine crossed through it, carrying a cleaver broad enough to split a tank hatch. His armor had ruptured across the abdomen. Coils of diseased organs bulged through the opening, protected by chains and strips of corroded plate. Holt drew his chainsword and led the countercharge. The weapon struck the plague marine's forearm and jammed between armor plates. The herald swung his cleaver. Holt released the sword and dropped beneath the blade. It passed over his head and removed 2 guardsmen behind him. Holt seized a melter bomb from a dead sapper. The plague marine reached down. A gauntlet closed around Holt's shoulder and lifted him from the ground. Holt drove the bomb into the abdominal rupture. His arm vanished wrist-deep inside diseased organs. Worms crawled across his glove. Something bit through the material and into his palm. He armed the charge. Judgment delivered. The melter bomb detonated. White heat consumed the plague marine from within. Armor opened like softened wax. The lower torso burst apart and covered Holt in burning organs. The blast threw him across the trench. He struck a wall and collapsed. Half his face was gone. Skin had burned away from temple to jaw. One eye had ruptured. Teeth showed through the remains of his cheek. Blackened pieces of the plague marine clung to his coat and continued twitching. A trooper knelt beside him. "Commissar!" Holt's surviving eye opened. "Why have you stopped firing?" The trooper returned to the line. Holt rose. He stood because men were watching. In the Manufacturum district, Hecaton 9 opened the sealed vaults. Combat servitors marched into the war beneath banners of the Omnissiah. Heavy bolters, plasma cannon, and hydraulic claws replaced their limbs. Cataphron engines rolled behind them on tracked bodies, Cognis weapons rotating toward plague targets. Automated defense constructs followed. Their armor remained clean compared with the fortress around them. Sacred oils gleamed upon weapon housings. Machine prayers flowed through the noosphere as they moved toward Wall 4. They struck the Herald advance with overwhelming fire. Plasma blasts turned plague marines into burning fragments. Cognis Lascanon destroyed blight haulers. Servitors entered the poxwalker hordes and crushed bodies beneath tracks. For several minutes, the Mechanicus reserves restored the line. Then Golver activated the infection. The Biologus putrefier stood inside a captured noospheric relay beneath Wall 7. Injector tendrils entered the machine altar around him. His canisters pulsed with diseased light. The corruption planted across decades awakened. Noospheric prayers changed. Recognition protocols inverted. Machine spirits received new definitions. Loyal infantry became contaminants. The Cataphron cohorts turned. Their weapons fired into the guard formations beside them. Plasma cannon erased whole platoons. Heavy bolters cut through men sheltering behind the machines they had welcomed as reinforcements. Combat servitors tore open command posts and crushed engine seers attempting to restore control. Hecaton 9 flooded the network with override rights. The machines answered with the hidden litany Morvaine's infrastructure had whispered for generations. Purity through fertile suspension. Purity through the patient bloom. The Magos severed the command link. Too late. The Manufactorum reserves had become another army inside Calistin. Malachor Fell entered Wall 4 through the breach at Bastion Mordain. He carried his power scythe in one hand and an ancient combi bolter in the other. The weapon's casing bore marks older than Morvaine's first foundations. Corrosion covered its surface, yet its action remained precise. Fell fired only when something obstructed him. A heavy weapons team turned a Lascannon toward him. The combi bolter barked twice. The gunner and loader came apart inside their position. A guard captain charged with a power sword. Fell caught the blade upon the haft of his scythe, forced it aside, and cut the man from shoulder to pelvis. He continued walking. Wounded soldiers lay against the walls. Fell ignored them. Civilians crowded an evacuation corridor nearby, too terrified to move. He passed without looking toward them. Some began to weep. Others expected execution and received only the slow rasp of his armor as he moved on. That restraint frightened them more than slaughter. It meant they were beneath his notice. It meant he knew the plague would finish what his blade did not. Edrin Pell followed under guard, recording the entry of the Heralds into Calistin. He saw a wounded boy in a labor uniform crawl away from Fell's path. The siege lord stepped over him. "Why leave him alive?" Pell asked. Fell did not turn. Alive is a temporary condition. The final gates of the central citadel began closing before sunset. Wren had ordered selected formations withdrawn. Command staff, surviving Imperial fists, fortress reserves, and essential Mechanicus personnel moved toward the inner defenses. Billions remained outside. They filled the avenues leading to the citadel. Civilians carried ration tins, icons, and wounded relatives. Soldiers abandoned units and forced their way into the crowds. Priests raised aquillas and shouted that the gates must remain open. They did not. Adamantine portals descended. The sound rolled through Calistin like the closing of a tomb. Crowds reached the threshold. Hands clawed at the metal. Men pushed children beneath the narrowing gap. Soldiers fired into civilians to clear passage for their own units. Bodies fell and were trampled flat. Beyond them, poxwalkers emerged through the smoke. Plague Marines followed. The crowd surged harder. Men became trapped against the gate. Ribs broke. Faces flattened against iron. Fingers reached beneath the descending edge and were severed when it struck the ground. The portals did not close cleanly. Too many bodies lay beneath them. Hydraulic systems forced the gates downward. Skulls burst. Spines folded. Flesh spread across the threshold in a moving ridge. Blood sprayed beneath the metal and ran into the citadel's drainage channels. The final defenders watched from within. The gates sealed upon the dead and the living alike. Outside, billions screamed. Inside, no one opened the doors. The central citadel had been designed to shelter 10 million souls. More than 300 million forced their way inside before the final gates closed. They filled every barracks, crypt, loading bay, and devotional gallery. They slept beneath ammunition lifts and between the feet of saint statues. Families occupied reactor access corridors until engine seers drove them out with shock mauls. Soldiers established firing positions inside food vaults, while starving civilians watched ration crates disappear behind walls of bayonets. The corridors became packed so tightly that the dead could not fall. Men died upright between strangers, held in place by the pressure of bodies around them. Their eyes remained open, their mouths filled with the hair of those pressed against their faces. When the crowd shifted,
The corpses moved with it, carried along without ever touching the floor. The ventilation systems spread fever through the citadel. Every breath tasted of metal, sweat, and infected lungs. Condensation ran down the walls in greasy streams. Men licked it from ferrocrete, despite warning signs declaring the moisture unclean. Those who drank developed black lesions beneath their tongues. Ammunition carts could not reach the outer galleries. At the Hall of Tithes, a munitorum lieutenant ordered the crowd to part. No one moved. The cart behind him carried heavy bolter belts and lasgun charge packs needed at the western barricades. The press of civilians stretched for half a kilometer through the corridor. "Clear the passage," the lieutenant shouted. Men looked toward him without understanding. A child cried somewhere inside the mass. A laborer raised an empty ration bowl. Others began shouting that food had arrived. The lieutenant fired his last pistol into the ceiling. The crowd surged toward the cart. He gave the order. The escort opened fire. Las beams cut through the foremost ranks. Bodies burst against those behind them. Men fell only where there was space to collapse, leaving the rest standing with smoking holes through their chests. The cart rolled across the dead. Its wheels crushed hands, faces, and ribs as it passed. No one called the act murder. The ammunition reached the barricades. Captain Bailey and Rourke returned through the drainage works shortly before the inner gates sealed. He emerged from a sewage conduit beneath the southern bastion with 11 Imperial fists behind him. Their yellow armor had become black and brown beneath filth, blood, and corrosion. Several limped. One carried his bolter in a single hand because the other arm ended at the elbow. Another had sealed a breach in his chest plate with a section of plague-marked metal cut from a dead herald. Rourke had lost his left arm. The limb had been severed above the elbow. Emergency seals covered the stump beneath his pauldron. Blood had dried in layers down his flank. In his remaining hand, he carried Cairn Droll's broken power maul. The corrupted weapon was taller than an ordinary man. Its head had split beneath Rourke's power fist, exposing cables, bone, and diseased tissue within. The severed gauntlet of the dead plague champion still clung to the haft. Soldiers saw the weapon and began to cheer. The sound spread through the lower galleries. "The enemy dies." Men repeated the words as Rourke passed. "The enemy dies." Guardsmen reached out to touch the broken maul. Some touched Rourke's armor instead. A priest fell to his knees and proclaimed the weapon a relic of imperial endurance. Rourke allowed them their belief. He knew what the symbol concealed. Droll had died. Another champion had stepped forward before the corpse cooled. The death guard had not slowed. Individual deaths no longer mattered, because the siege had ceased to depend upon individuals. The heralds advanced as erosion advanced, one grain at a time, indifferent to which fragment of stone broke first. Rourke carried the weapon because men needed proof. He carried his silence because the truth would kill more efficiently than any bolter. Lord General Castor Wren convened the final war council beneath the command vault's cracked dome. The hololith no longer displayed Morvain as a world. Too many sensor networks had failed. Too many command relays had turned hostile. Only the central citadel remained clear, a gold ember surrounded by red darkness. Colonel Hadron Malk stood before the projection. "We concentrate every surviving formation around the primary reactor complex and the astropathic sanctum," he said. "Collapse the eastern transit arteries. Mine the devotional galleries. Use the cathedral halls as layered firing zones." Hecaton 9's chassis clicked across the floor. "The machine vaults require priority defense." Malk looked toward him. "The vaults do not command the fortress. The vaults preserve irreplaceable reactor templates, weapon patterns, and noospheric archives. Those archives have been poisoning us for decades. Corrupted elements have been isolated." Rourke entered the chamber. Every officer turned. He dropped Droll's broken maul onto the strategium table. The impact dented the surface. Commissar Severin Holt watched from beside Wren's throne. Half his face had been replaced by blackened synth flesh stretched across exposed bone.
One eye remained. The other socket had been sealed beneath a steel plate. His voice emerged roughened by damage to his throat. "Discipline can hold the Citadel for another week." Rourke looked at him. "No." Holt's surviving eye narrowed. "You have not inspected every defense." "I have inspected the enemy." Wren leaned forward, pain visible beneath the pallor of his face. "How long?" Rourke turned toward the tactical display. "The Citadel will fall before the next planetary rotation." No one spoke. Beyond the command vault, the crowd roared around another food distribution point. Gunfire followed. Wren looked down at his hands. Morvain had possessed 9 walls. It had possessed billions of defenders, orbital guns, titans, void shields, and enough artillery to erase continents. Now, a single rotation seemed generous. The Vox altar awakened. Static rolled through the chamber. Every rune changed to the same corroded green. Malachor Fell spoke. His voice entered every surviving channel within the Citadel. It sounded from trench speakers, shrine organs, helmet receivers, and the mouths of servitors whose vocal cords had been removed years earlier. "Defenders of Morvain." The crowd noise outside weakened. Men stopped to listen. "I offer no survival." Wren stood. Fell continued. "Open the gates, and the pain will shorten. Open the gates, and fewer of you will die believing rescue remains possible." No threat followed. No promise of clemency. Only the patient certainty of a man discussing a process already complete. Wren moved to the Vox altar. "This is Lord General Castor Wren, commander of Bastion World Morvain." His voice traveled through the Citadel. "You offer nothing, because you possess nothing worthy of acceptance." A wet mechanical breath answered him. Wren gripped the altar. "Morvain belongs to the Emperor. If only bones remain when this world is reclaimed, then those bones will bear his mark." Fell's reply came quietly. "Bones bear every mark placed upon them." The transmission ended. The final bombardment began before the echo faded. The Heralds targeted a single section of the western Citadel wall. Shell after shell struck the same point. The first impact shattered the outer armor. The next drove fragments inward. Hours passed. The stone did not merely break. It became powder. Ferrocrete mixed with blood. Armor became molten slag. Men sheltering behind the wall were pulped by pressure waves before any fragment touched them. Lungs ruptured. Eyes burst from sockets. Blood sprayed from ears and mouths. Reinforcement crews entered the damaged galleries and died beneath the next salvo. Their bodies disappeared into the pulverized mass coating the walls. The bombardment continued. By the time the breach opened, stone, metal, and human remains had become one substance. The tunnel through the wall was lined with human paste. Poxwalkers entered first. They crawled through on hands and knees, slipping in the remains of defenders compacted against the breach. Heavy bolters opened fire from the inner galleries. The first ranks came apart. Those behind them crawled over the pieces. The last battle of Morvain began in the Cathedral of Ascension. Imperial banners hung above the nave, burning from shell fragments and plague fire. Guardsmen formed firing lines behind stone pews. Heavy weapons teams occupied confessionals and reliquary alcoves. Poxwalkers filled the entrance. Last fire struck them in waves. They fell beneath statues of saints and rose again among the shattered stone. A priest stood upon the high altar, shouting the litany of endurance, while shells burst through the roof. Shrapnel opened his abdomen. His intestines spilled across his robes and coiled around his boots. He continued preaching. "Faith is the wall no traitor can breach." A Plague Marine's bolter fired. The round entered his chest and detonated. Pieces of him struck the burning altar. The sermon continued from loudspeakers after his death, trapped in a damaged recording loop. "Faith is the wall." The Death Guard advanced through stained glass fragments and blood. Their boots crushed the faces of saints. Blight launchers filled the side chapels with infected shrapnel.
plague spewers washed defenders from the choir galleries. Great cleavers struck pews and men with equal force. A guardsman drove a bayonet into a herald's throat seal. The plague marine seized him by the skull and pushed both thumbs through his eyes. The bones of the face collapsed beneath the pressure. The herald moved on before the body fell. The fighting reached the reactor levels. Combat servitors fired from cooling galleries. Skitari died defending machine altars, already transmitting plague code. Hecaton 9 directed the defense through fragments of a noosphere that answered him with corrupted hymns. At the Avenue of Martyrs, Severin Holt gathered every man capable of holding a weapon. Deserters stood among trench veterans. Ration thieves stood beside provost guards. Clerks carried las pistols. Laborers held mining tools. Wounded men leaned against barricades because they lacked enough legs to stand unaided. Holt walked before them. His greatcoat hung burned and stiff around his ruined body. One deserter lowered his rifle. "Will you shoot us if we run?" Holt looked toward the far end of the avenue. Poxwalkers moved through smoke beyond the statues. "No." The man stared at him. Holt opened a crate of charge packs and began handing them out. "I have spent too many rounds upon men who should have faced the enemy." He placed a pack into the deserter's hands. "I will not threaten you." The avenue shook. The heralds were close. Holt drew his bolt pistol. "I ask only that you die facing forward." The defenders formed ranks. Poxwalkers entered the Avenue of Martyrs. The first volley cut them down. The second burned through those climbing over the dead. Grenades burst beneath the statues. Heavy stubbers tore the horde apart at waist height. The defenders destroyed the first wave, then the second. Plague bearers came with the third, counting each casualty in mournful voices. Holt led the countercharge into them. His bolt pistol fired until the magazine emptied. He used the weapon as a club, breaking a demon's single horn before a guardsman thrust a bayonet through its eye. The fourth wave brought plague marines. The line began to fold. Holt climbed onto the barricade. "Face forward." A plague spewer fired. The stream struck him from chest to head. His coat dissolved. Armor sloughed away. Flesh ran from his body in steaming sheets. His remaining eye burst. The skin of his face vanished, leaving bone blackened beneath corrosive fluid. Holt remained upright. For several seconds, the commissar stood as little more than a burning skeleton wrapped in scraps of uniform. The men saw him. They did not run. Then his bones collapsed into the filth. Rourke met Malachor Fell before the inner sanctum. The chamber had been constructed around a narrow processional arch. Stone columns restricted the reach of Fell's scythe. Rourke had chosen the ground deliberately. The Imperial Fist stood with his storm shield strapped across the stump of his missing arm. His remaining power fist crackled. Fell approached alone. His ancient combi bolter hung empty at his side. The power scythe rested in both hands. Rourke looked at him. "You bleed." Fell's helm inclined. "So does stone." Rourke charged. His shield struck the scythe haft and forced the blade into a column. Stone exploded. Rourke drove his power fist into Fell's chest. Corrupted plate collapsed inward. Black fluid burst through the broken armor. Fell staggered. Rourke attacked again, controlled and relentless. He used the narrow space to deny the scythe its full arc. Shield against haft, fist against plate. No wasted movement. His power fist struck Fell's knee. The joint burst. Bone and diseased tissue exposed themselves beneath torn armor. The siege lord dropped to one leg. Rourke seized the scythe haft and pulled. Fell came forward. The Imperial Fist nearly tore the damaged leg free. Fell released one hand. His gauntlet closed around Rourke's shield. The corroded fingers crushed its edge. Rourke struck his helm. The blow split the faceplate and revealed something pale moving beneath it. Fell did not fall. He turned the scythe across Rourke's power fist and trapped the arm beneath the haft. The blade reversed. It entered Rourke below the ribs. Fell drove it through him and into the fortress wall. The Imperial Fist hung impaled against stone. Blood ran down his armor. His power fist opened and closed once. Fell leaned close. "You built well." Rourke heard the citadel breaking beyond the sanctum, men screaming, weapons falling silent, the final defense lines collapsing one after another. His head lowered. Fell left him alive long enough to hear the last wall fail. Wren gave the order from the command throne. "Overload the planetary reactors." Hecaton 9 stood before the activation altar. Projected atomic release will render Morvain strategically unrecoverable. That is the intention. Machine vault loss will be total. The enemy receives nothing. The Magos extended interface tendrils into the reactor command system. Ancient locks opened. Containment rights reversed. Warning sirens began across the citadel. Wren watched the energy readings climb. "Do it." Hecaton 9 transmitted the final command. The reactors did not detonate. Coolant pumps activated instead. Across Morvain, reservoirs hidden beneath the Manufactoria opened. Their contents were not water. They were plague cultures cultivated within cooling systems for decades. Golvair's corruption entered the overload sequence. Reactor pressure forced infected material through every ventilation shaft, geothermal conduit, and maintenance artery. The fortress exhaled disease. Clouds erupted from floors. Prayer vents vomited black spores. Walls split and released yellow vapor. Men died before they could raise respirators. Others remained alive as their organs softened inside them. The command vault filled with mist. Wren tried to stand. His legs failed. Fluid ran from his mouth. His abdomen swelled beneath his uniform. The organs within him began to liquefy, their substance draining into his body cavity. Malk collapsed beside the strategium, clawing at his throat. Hecaton 9 transmitted a final Binharic prayer before his systems filled with corrupted code. The doors opened. Malachor Fell entered without haste. Wren looked up from beside the command throne. "You breached nothing," he whispered. Fell crossed the chamber. "No." The Siege Lord looked upon the dying commanders of Morvain. "We did not conquer your walls." Wren's body convulsed. Blood and yellow fluid spilled between his teeth. Fell rested the butt of his scythe against the floor. Morvain conquered itself when its rulers decided which of its children would be abandoned. The Lord General died beneath the throne. Around him, the fortress continued breathing plague. Edron Pell began the final entry, while Morvain was still dying. He wrote from the command bridge of the Sepulchre of Patience, beneath corroded arches and censers that exhaled grave-sweet vapor. The Bastion world turned below, its atmosphere bruised by fire and plague. Calistin remained visible through the cloud cover, a continent of black walls surrounding a central citadel whose towers still burned. Pell entered the words into a stolen Munitorum slate. Morvain had fallen. He stared at the sentence. Then he deleted it. The walls still stood. Wall 9 remained intact across most of its circumference. Its gun decks possessed enough ammunition to sustain weeks of bombardment. Wall 8's armor gates were sealed. Wall 7 retained operational defense lasers. Depots beneath Wall 6 contained untouched shells, fuel reserves, and sealed weapon stocks. Millions of soldiers remained armed. Some still occupied trenches. Some stood at gun positions with las rifles resting against their shoulders, staring across fields of dead without firing. Others sat inside loaded tanks whose engines remained warm. Officers possessed command codes. Vox networks continued transmitting orders. No one obeyed them. The fortress had not ceased to exist. Its people had ceased believing that it mattered. Pell wrote again. Morvain remained structurally defensible. Organized resistance had ended. That was closer to truth. He had learned the distinction aboard the plague cruiser. Truth was not what had happened. Truth was the shape a survivor could force upon what remained. Below, the harvest began. Poxwalkers were driven from Calistin in columns broad enough to fill the avenues. Plague-bearers walked beside them, counting in droning voices. Cultists carried hooked staffs and struck any corpse that failed to move. Some of the dead crawled.
Others shuffled with opened bellies and limbs hanging by strips of tissue. The living moved among them. Workers, soldiers, and refugees emerged from shelters bearing the first marks of corruption. Some had blackened gums. Some carried swollen growths beneath their uniforms. Others appeared untouched, except for the emptiness in their eyes. They formed lines without being ordered. No imperial officer commanded them. No commissar threatened them. The instinct to obey had survived the imperium that created it. Cultists gathered in the plazas and branded themselves beneath ruined statues of saints. Heated copper stamps were pressed into chests, backs, and foreheads. 3 joined circles burned into flesh. Men screamed, laughed, or remained silent, while fat hissed beneath the mark. Golver claimed the hospitals. Pell watched picked feeds from Medici districts, where the biologus putrefier moved between surgical tables. The wounded were no longer treated for survival. Their bodies were opened, measured, and altered. Organs were removed and replaced with infected growths. Blood was drained into glass vessels. Plague strains were introduced into men selected according to age, regiment, and exposure history. Every hospital became a laboratory. Every corpse processing district became an incubator. Rendering vats were emptied of ration paste and filled with the dead. Heat, chemicals, and warp-borne infection transformed the contents into living cultures. Pipe networks that had once carried corpse starch now distributed plague slurry through the lower hives. Vere called it reclamation. The word remained imperial. Only its meaning had changed. The heralds counted their losses in the ruins of Calastin's command vault. Othric Sevenfold stood where Lord General Wren had died. Brass counters clicked across the tallyman's armor, while servo skulls moved among the bodies, reading gene signatures, armor marks, and remnants of memory from the dead. Cairn Droll was entered into the ledger. So were the heralds lost aboard Fidelis Rex, those destroyed during the sortie, and those buried beneath artillery emplacements during the 7-day rain. Scores of plague marines had fallen. Thousands of cultists had died. Demon engines lay shattered across the plains. Whole Poxwalker armies had been vaporized beneath macro cannon fire and Titan weapons. Plague-burst crawlers had been reduced to burning hulls. Blight haulers twitched inside shell craters, their metal limbs still trying to crawl, despite the destruction of everything that had once directed them. Pell expected Fell to mourn the cost. The Siege Lord stood before the ruined command throne, with his damaged leg locked inside a brace of bone and corroded iron. His breastplate remained crushed where Rourke's power fist had struck. Black fluid seeped from the wound and dried across the green armor. Othric completed the tally. Strategic gain exceeds projected expenditure. Fell looked toward the dead Lord General. Assets? Billions of infected bodies suitable for conversion or cultivation. 37 major ammunition depots intact. 11 continental manufacturing complexes recoverable. Calastin Gate remains stable. Orbital infrastructure damaged but usable. Losses? Acceptable. Pell heard the answer without emotion. The warband had not sacrificed lives carelessly. It had simply measured them against what had been gained and found the exchange favorable. He returned to his chronicle. The history of the Heralds of Despair remained a greater absence than Morvaine's dead. Pell searched captured archives, plague ship data stacks, and fragments preserved in the memories of servitors. He found references to sieges without names, a fortress moon starved during an age whose date had been erased by inquisitorial order, a shrine world whose wells turned black after 7 years of encirclement, an ammunition planet where every gate remained sealed when relief arrived because the defenders believed the rescue fleet carried plague, a citadel whose population was found kneeling before empty food stores, every body facing inward rather than toward the walls. Some records named the Death Guard, some named the Heralds. Others spoke only of bells, green armor, and enemies who waited beyond gun range
until defenders began eating one another. Pell could prove none of it. The same siege appeared in documents separated by centuries. Different worlds shared the same casualty totals. Witnesses described warriors wearing Great Crusade plate beside armor, taken from chapters not founded until thousands of years later. Perhaps the records had been corrupted. Perhaps the Heralds had claimed older atrocities. Perhaps other Death Guard Vectoriums had been confused with them. Perhaps names meant less to warriors who had lived long enough to watch empires forget themselves. Pell entered no founding date. He named no first commander. He wrote that the warband's origin remained uncertain. Malachor Fell did not correct him. Othric summoned Pell to the command vault after the final tallies were complete. The tallyman stood amid parchment scrolls, hanging from cables and broken statuary. His servo skull hovered beside him, whispering numbers with the voice of a dead child. Pell held the slate against his chest. "You requested me. You will record the sum." Othric extended a length of cured skin covered in tiny script. The categories had been written in High Gothic: bombardment, plague, starvation, execution, riot, friendly fire, despair. Pell read the figures. Deaths from bombardment numbered in the hundreds of millions. Disease claimed billions. Starvation and contaminated water killed more than the combined artillery of both armies. Imperial executions filled columns long enough to cover entire scrolls. Riots and battles between loyal formations had consumed populations larger than those of many worlds. The final category exceeded them all. Pell looked up. "How do you count despair?" Othric's cloudy eye regarded him. "Suicide, desertion resulting in death, abandonment of operational positions, refusal of available food, failure to fire upon an identified enemy, surrender without terms, cessation of resistance while physical capacity remained. Those are different acts. They share a cause. Some men ceased fighting because they were exhausted. Exhaustion is flesh acknowledging what hope refuses." Pell looked again at the total. It was the largest figure. Not plague, not shells, not hunger. The greatest weapon used again. St. Morvain had left no wound that a medici could identify. Pell entered the tally. Fell read the completed chronicle aboard the Sepulchre of Patience. The Siege Lord stood behind Pell's lectern, while pages moved across the Pell waited for corrections. None came. Fell did not alter the strength of the Imperial armies. He did not increase the number of worlds dependent upon the Callistin Gate. He did not erase Imperial bravery, or reduce the losses suffered by his own Vectorium. He removed only one word: conquered. Every time Pell had written that the Heralds conquered a wall, a district, or the world itself, Fell deleted the passage. At last, Pell turned. "You took Morvain." Fell placed the slate upon the lectern. "Conquerors desire possession. You hold its gate, its weapons, its population. For a time. Then what are you?" The cracked helm regarded him. "A demonstration." "Of what?" "That all walls are temporary." Fell rested one gauntlet upon the scarred Munitorum slate. "Stone decays, metal corrodes, bloodlines weaken, creeds contradict themselves. Empires survive by pretending these truths apply only to their enemies." "And you exist to prove otherwise?" "We exist because proof is unnecessary." Pell looked toward Morvain through the bridge displays. "The Imperium will return." "Yes." "They will rebuild." "Yes." "Then what did this accomplish?" Fell's damaged armor rasped as he leaned closer. "They will rebuild with the knowledge that it happened." Small groups of Imperial survivors remained sealed beneath the fortress. Some had occupied bunkers omitted from modern defense maps. Others had welded doors shut when the first plague alarm sounded and ignored every later order. Their stores lasted because they had refused entry to refugees, wounded soldiers and officers demanding shelter. Bunker Serix contained 2,800 survivors. Its commander had maintained silence for weeks. He executed anyone who attempted to activate a transmitter. When engines sounded overhead after the fighting ended, he believed the relief force had finally arrived. The bunker's outer picked recorder showed Imperial vehicles in the avenue, Munitorum supply carriers, water tankers, servitors bearing the double-headed eagle. The commander ordered the doors opened. Clean-looking water waited outside in sealed containers. Ration crates carried valid tithe stamps taken from the destroyed relief fleet. Plague-marked servitors stood beside them with heads bowed. A recorded voice welcomed the survivors. By authority of the Departamento Munitorum, emergency relief is now in effect. The survivors cheered. They carried the supplies inside. The first water canister was opened before the doors finished closing. Far beyond Morvain, the Administratum received its final transmission. The message traveled through damaged astropathic relays and reached a sector archive after months of distortion. It contained portions of Wren's declarations of victory, fragments of Lord Admiral Hale's pleas, corrupted casualty figures, and automated reports claiming every defense belt remained operational. Adept Ralvan Cord reviewed the data beneath the light of a failing lumen. He had never seen Morvain. He did not know how many had died there. 3 possible classifications appeared upon his slate: secure, destroyed, strategically contested. Destroyed status required confirmation from recognized Imperial command. No recognized commander had transmitted a formal declaration of loss. Cord selected strategically contested. The designation entered the sector ledger. Reinforcements were approved. Estimated arrival lay several years in the future. Morvain continued paying tithes in the official record because no authorized form had suspended them. The Heralds abandoned most of the planet. They left plague cults within the hives, poxwalker herds across the continents, and a small garrison guarding the Calistine Gate. Golvair remained long enough to seed the water tables and manufacturum systems with strains designed to survive Imperial purification. The plague fleet assembled above the world. Captured transports joined the formation. Ammunition and fuel were loaded into corrupted holds. Bodies filled troop decks, where soldiers had once waited to descend as rescuers. Pell returned to the Sepulchre of Patience. No one asked whether he wished to remain. His restraints were not replaced. They were no longer necessary. A new lectern waited beside the bridge strategium. Blank slates had been arranged upon it. The erased Aquilus showed where each had been taken from an Imperial archive. "You will continue," Fell said. Pell looked at the fleet preparing to enter the Calistine Gate. "How many worlds?" "Enough. I am a prisoner." Fell turned away. "You are a herald." The plague fleet entered the warp. Morvain vanished behind them. Time lost meaning within the Empyrean. Pell slept in intervals measured by bells. He wrote until his fingers cramped, rested until the words returned, and dreamed of walls closing around him. When the fleet emerged, another fortress system waited beyond the void. Its bastion world appeared upon the bridge hololith. Orbital platforms, defense lasers, minefields, hive cities arranged behind concentric walls. Imperial commanders detected the plague fleet and received Morvain's corrupted distress signal. They heard Wren proclaiming that relief had arrived. They heard Hale promising salvation. They heard millions screaming behind sealed gates. The fortress system reacted exactly as Malachor Fell had predicted. Patrol vessels were recalled. Outer colonies were abandoned. Civilian traffic was diverted toward the central bastion. Troops withdrew from exposed positions. One gate closed, then another. Across the system, populations were ordered into shelters, while armor portals descended around them. Othric Sevenfold moved the first brass counter. Pell stood beside his new lectern and watched the distant world imprison itself. Malachor Fell rested both hands upon his scythe. The final gate closed. The tally began.